Hi everyone, welcome to Red Umbrella. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Family Guy's treatment of Meg Griffin represents one of television's most uncomfortable running gags, a joke that evolved from mild dismissal into systematic abuse, revealing not just a fictional family's dysfunction, but the real-world writing room's inability to write teenage girls. Through 22 seasons, Meg's mistreatment escalated from being called boring to physical violence, emotional torture, and a disturbing justification that she must be abused to keep her family together. This is not just comedy gone wrong. This is a documented failure of male-dominated comedy writing that only changed when women joined the writer's room. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we have managed to build. Anyway, that is enough. Let's begin. When Family Guy first aired in January 1999, Meg Griffin was just a normal teenage girl. She went to high school, dealt with the usual teenage problems, and tried to fit in with her peers. Her family was chaotic and weird, sure, but Meg herself was remarkably average. She wore normal clothes, had normal interests, and wanted what most teenagers want: to be accepted, to be loved, and to not be humiliated by her parents in public. But right from the very first episode, something was off. The show made it clear that Meg was unwanted, not in a subtle way either. In the premiere episode Death Has a Shadow, which aired on January 31st, 1999, Peter Griffin grounded his daughter for touching the thermostat. That was it. That was the crime. Meg adjusted the temperature in her own home, and her father punished her for it. This was the first documented instance of what would become 22 seasons of abuse, neglect, and systematic mistreatment. Most families have rules about the thermostat. Parents get annoyed when kids waste electricity or make the house too hot or cold. But the way Family Guy presented this moment was different. There was no conversation, no explanation, no teaching moment. Peter just grounded Meg. It was arbitrary, it was harsh, and most importantly, it established something crucial about how this family operated. Meg was at the bottom of the hierarchy, and the rules that applied to her did not apply to anyone else. The very next episode, I Never Met the Dead Man, which aired in April 1999, revealed something even more disturbing about Meg's place in the family. In a flashback to Meg's birth, Peter was shown being disappointed that his baby was a girl. He literally asked the doctor to check again, as if the doctor might have made a mistake. Think about that for a second. From the moment Meg entered the world, her own father wished she was someone else. She was born female, and that alone was enough to disappoint Peter Griffin. This was not normal sitcom parent behavior. This was rejection at the most fundamental level. These early episodes established a pattern. Meg was not abused in the way we typically think of abuse in those first few seasons. There was no physical violence yet. No one was hitting her or throwing things at her. Instead, the abuse was quieter, more insidious. It was neglect. It was dismissal. It was treating Meg like she was an inconvenience, a mistake, something to be tolerated rather than loved. During the first 3 seasons, the running joke about Meg was simple. She was boring. Compared to her genius baby brother Stewie, her idiotic but lovable brother Chris, her attractive mother Lois, and her outrageous father Peter, Meg was plain. She did not have funny quirks. She did not go on wild adventures. She was just a teenage girl trying to survive high school and deal with her insane family. The show treated this normalcy as a character flaw. In the episode Stuck Together, Torn Apart from Season 2, the entire Griffin family gathered in Meg's bedroom to read her diary out loud for entertainment. They laughed at her private thoughts. They mocked her feelings. They turned her most vulnerable personal writing into a joke for their own amusement. When you think about what that scene represents, it is genuinely cruel. A diary is where teenagers process their emotions, where they write things they cannot say out loud, where they work through the confusion and pain of growing up. And the Griffin family treated Meg's diary like a comedy special. Meg did not fight back. She did not scream at them to get out. She just accepted it. Even in these early seasons, the show was teaching Meg that her feelings did not matter, that her privacy did not exist, and that her family saw her as entertainment rather than a person. The casual nature of the neglect made it almost worse than outright cruelty. In one early episode, the family was so sleep-deprived that they simply forgot Meg existed. They left for church without her, and Meg had to chase the car down the street. The scene played for laughs, but think about what it means. Your entire family gets in the car and drives away without noticing you were missing. That is not a funny mistake. That is a family that fundamentally does not register your existence. Then there was the collagen lip injection storyline, which appeared in the Season 1 episode Mind Over Murder. Meg desperately wanted collagen injections to make her lips fuller and more attractive. She begged her mother repeatedly for permission. The show made it clear that Meg felt insecure about her appearance. that she wanted to change herself to be more accepted. Eventually, she got the injections, but they went horribly wrong. Her lips became deformed, swollen, and eventually wrinkled and droopy. When the episode ended and everything returned to normal for the rest of the family, Meg's lips stayed damaged. The family did not take her to get them fixed. Lois explicitly told Meg that she deserved the deformed lips for covering for Peter's lie earlier in the episode. Let me repeat that. Meg's mother looked at her daughter's disfigured face and said she deserved it, not as a moment of temporary anger, not as something Lois immediately regretted. The show treated this as justified. Meg had done something wrong, so permanent facial disfigurement was an appropriate consequence. This was season 1. This was before the show became known for extreme violence and shocking humor. This was when Family Guy was still trying to be a somewhat grounded animated sitcom about a dysfunctional family. And even then, the message was clear: Meg does not matter. Throughout these early seasons, the abuse was mostly verbal and emotional rather than physical. Chris, Meg's younger brother, told her to keep her lips shut when she complained about not getting the collagen injections. Brian, the family dog, and the character usually positioned as the voice of reason, suggested they put her outside for a while like she was an annoying pet. These were not villains saying these things. These were main characters the audience was supposed to like and relate to. The show also established that Meg's mistreatment extended beyond her immediate family. At school, Meg was bullied by the popular girls, particularly Connie D'Amico and her friends. They mocked Meg's appearance, excluded her from social events, and made her high school experience miserable. In the season 2 episode, Love Thy Trophy, Meg was ridiculed for not owning a Prada bag. One girl called her bag big and ugly, and Meg was not invited to lunch because of it. As she ran away crying, a teacher accidentally smacked Meg in the face with her own bag. That physical comedy moment, the bag hitting Meg's face, was small, but it represented something larger. The universe of Family Guy was turning against Meg. It was not just her family anymore. It was teachers, classmates, random strangers. Everyone who encountered Meg treated her with contempt or indifference. Meg tried to fix the situation by getting a job at a pancake restaurant to earn money for her own Prada bag. She worked hard, earned the money, and bought the bag. Finally, she would have the one thing that would make the popular girls accept her. But even that small victory was taken away. She was forced to return the bag to get Stewie out of foster care after the family's negligence got him temporarily removed from their home. Meg's desires, her hard work, her one attempt to improve her social standing, all of it was sacrificed for the family's benefit. This pattern repeated throughout the early seasons. Meg would want something. She would try to achieve it, and the family would either mock her for wanting it or take it away when she got it. The show never presented this as tragic or unfair, it just was. Meg was the character things happened to, not the character who made things happen. At school, the mistreatment continued. Scott, another student, slammed his locker directly into Meg's face in one episode. Mr. Burler, a teacher, stepped on Meg's stomach and did not notice or care, even when Meg yelped in pain. These were not major plot points. They were background jokes, quick visual gags that reinforced the show's thesis about Meg. She was so insignificant that people could literally hurt her and not even realize they had done it. The early seasons also included disturbing hints about Meg's birth and early childhood. In the season 3 episode Petarded, the show suggested that Meg's father might not even be Peter. It was played as a throwaway joke, but the implication was dark. If Peter was not Meg's biological father, it would explain some of his disproportionate hatred. But it would also mean that Meg's entire existence was the result of something Peter resented. Lois's infidelity or mistake from before their marriage was solid. The episode Ratings Guy from season 11 included a flashback that showed Peter and Lois taking baby Meg to the fire station for the first time. Except they were not there for a tour. They crept up to the door, put baby Meg down on the dirty stoop, and tried to run away. They attempted to abandon their infant daughter at a fire station like she was an unwanted package. The firefighters presumably stopped them or they changed their minds, but the scene made it clear. Meg was unwanted from birth. What made the early seasons so unsettling was the casual nature of it all. This was not a family that hated Meg because of something she did. She had not betrayed them or hurt them or caused some major problem. She was just born, and her family decided she was disappointing. She was boring when they wanted exciting. She was normal when they wanted chaos. She was a teenage girl when Peter wanted a son. The show's writers during this period, which Seth MacFarlane later admitted were predominantly male, simply did not know what to do with a teenage girl character. They could write Stewie, the evil genius baby who wanted to kill his mother and take over the world. They could write Peter, the lovable idiot who destroyed everything he touched. They could write Brian, the intellectual dog who dated human women and wrote terrible novels. But Meg? She was just a girl, and that was boring to them. So instead of developing her character, Instead of giving her storylines or depth or making her interesting, they made her the butt of jokes. They made her the character everyone ignored. They established that Meg's role in the family was to be the normal one, which in the world of Family Guy meant being the worthless one. Looking back at these early episodes, you can see the foundation being laid for everything that came later. The physical abuse, the appearance-based insults, the extreme violence, all of it started with these small moments of neglect and dismissal. The show taught the audience that it was funny to ignore Meg, funny to exclude her, funny to treat her like garbage. And once that baseline was established, once the audience accepted that Meg existed to be mistreated, the writers could push further and further. By season 3, the pattern was set. Meg would try to connect with her family. She would seek approval, affection, or just basic respect. And the family would respond with mockery, dismissal, or cruelty. The show never presented this as a problem to be solved. It was just how things were. Meg was the family punching bag, and everyone, including the audience, was supposed to find that funny. But the truth is, it was only funny because the abuse was still relatively mild. Meg was called boring. She was forgotten occasionally. Her feelings were dismissed. Those things are hurtful, sure, but they are the kind of hurtful things that happen in real dysfunctional families. People could laugh because they recognized it. They knew what it was. Like to feel overlooked or dismissed by family members. What people did not realize was that the show was just getting started. These early seasons were not the Meg abuse. They were the warm-up. They were establishing the dynamic, teaching the audience that Meg deserved mistreatment because she was boring and normal. They were building the foundation for something much darker. By season 3, Meg had been trained to accept her role. She rarely complained. She rarely fought back. She absorbed the cruelty and kept trying to be a good daughter, a good sister, a good student. She kept hoping that if she was just a little bit better, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more like what her family wanted, they would finally love her. They never did. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But soon, being called boring would be the least of Meg's problems. Because in season 4, everything changed. The show stopped making fun of Meg for being dull and started making fun of her for something else. Something more cruel, more personal, and far more damaging. The jokes about Meg being boring were about to transform into jokes about Meg being ugly. And once that door opened, there was no limit to how far the writers would go. The shift to ugly season 4 of Family Guy premiered in 2005, and with it came a fundamental change in how the show treated Meg Griffin. The jokes were no longer about her being boring or normal or forgettable. The writers had found a new angle, a new way to mock their teenage character. They decided that Meg was not just unremarkable, she was ugly. And once that door opened, there was no closing it. The turning point came in the very first episode of season 4, titled Don't Make Me Over. This episode aired on June 5th, 2005, and it changed everything. In this episode, the Griffin family entered a talent competition and became pop stars after Meg received a makeover. But the important moment happened early in the episode, before the makeover, before the fame. Meg was at school and a boy rejected her romantic advances. His reason was simple and cruel. He told her she was ugly. That moment alone would have been painful enough. Teenage rejection is a universal experience, and having someone call you ugly is devastating at any age. But Family Guy did not stop there. When Meg came home and told her family what happened, Peter's response was not to comfort his daughter. He did not tell her the boy was wrong or mean or that beauty was subjective. Instead, Peter said the boy seemed smart. He agreed with the assessment. He looked at his daughter and confirmed that yes, she was ugly. Think about what that scene communicated. A teenage girl came home after being insulted about her appearance, seeking comfort from her family, and her father publicly agreed with the insult. This was not Peter being temporarily insensitive or making a bad joke in the moment. The show presented this as Peter's genuine opinion. His daughter was ugly and everyone should know it. But Peter went further. He told Chris, Meg's younger brother, to burn all of Meg's old photographs. Not hide them, not put them away, burn them. Erase the visual evidence that Meg had ever existed. The implication was clear. Meg was so unattractive that even her childhood photos needed to be destroyed. Her appearance was so offensive that the family should eliminate any record of it. This episode marked the moment when Meg's mistreatment shifted from psychological to physical. The jokes were no longer about her personality or her normalcy. They were about her body, her face, her physical existence. And once the show established that Meg was ugly, every joke about her appearance became acceptable. The writers had given themselves permission to mock a teenage girl's body, and they ran with it. Throughout season 4 and beyond, appearance-based insults became the standard way to attack Meg. In one episode, when Meg wore a cat costume for Halloween, Peter said she looked like a second-rate prostitute. Lois, her own mother, agreed and said Meg was dressed like a cheap whore. When Meg pointed out that she was wearing the exact same costume as Lois, her mother responded that Lois could fill it out while Meg could not. The message was explicit. Meg's body was inadequate compared to her mother's. Even wearing identical clothing, Meg was lesser. The insults were not limited to family members. When Lois introduced Meg to guests in another episode, she literally called Meg a whore in front of strangers. Not as a joke between them, not as playful teasing. Lois introduced her teenage daughter to visitors by calling her a whore. The guests did not react with shock or concern. The show treated this as normal behavior. In another scene, a school photographer tried to take Meg's picture for the yearbook. When he pointed the camera at her face and looked through the lens, the camera broke. The implication was that Meg's appearance was so offensive that it literally damaged equipment. This was not subtle comedy. This was the show stating outright that Meg's face was objectively terrible. The medical community in Quahog joined in on the mockery. In one episode, Chris was in an accident and got injured. When the doctor, Juanita, examined both Chris and Meg, she told Chris that although he was horribly disfigured from the accident, he would recover quickly. Then she looked at Meg and said her mutilated face would take much longer to heal. Meg was confused and explained that her face was not mutilated. She was not injured in the accident. This was just what Meg looked like normally. Juanita looked at Meg with disgust and said just 2 words. Really? Jeez. That scene was particularly cruel because it came from a medical professional. Doctors are supposed to be objective, clinical, non-judgmental. But even a doctor looked at Meg's normal, uninjured face and assumed it must be the result of severe trauma. The joke was that Meg's regular appearance was worse than actual disfigurement from an accident. The show also suggested that Meg's appearance made people uncomfortable on a fundamental level. When Meg could not get a date to her school dance, she decided to be a chaperone instead. But she could not just attend, she created a fake date out of a pickle wearing a tiny tuxedo, which she named Pickle Date. The visual of a teenage girl so unable to find human companionship that she brought a vegetable to a dance was played for maximum humiliation. The show was not sympathizing with Meg's loneliness. It was laughing at her desperation. During this period, the show established that Meg's ugliness was not a matter of opinion. It was presented as objective fact, something everyone agreed on. Popular kids thought Meg was ugly. Teachers thought Meg was ugly. Her family thought Meg was ugly. Strangers thought Meg was ugly. Even Meg's own body seemed to conspire against her. When she tried to improve her appearance with things like the collagen lip injections, the results were disasters that made her look worse. The shift from boring to ugly was significant because it changed the nature of the abuse. When Meg was mocked for being boring, the solution seemed achievable. She could do interesting things, have adventures, develop a personality. But being called ugly is different. That attacks something fundamental and unchangeable. It targets insecurity that almost every teenager has. It takes normal adolescent anxiety about appearance and amplifies it into a defining characteristic. The cruelty was compounded by the fact that Meg's character design was completely normal. In the visual language of Family Guy, where characters have exaggerated features and cartoonish proportions, Meg looked like a regular teenage girl. She did not have any grotesque features. She was not drawn to appear unattractive. The joke was that everyone treated a normal-looking girl as if she was hideous. This made the abuse feel more targeted, more personal. The writers were not making fun of an ugly character. They were calling a normal girl ugly and forcing everyone around her to agree. This period also saw the intensification of sexual humiliation. Meg was a teenage girl going through puberty, dealing with the normal awkwardness and confusion of adolescence. The show took that vulnerability and turned it into comedy. When Meg showed interest in boys, she was mocked for thinking anyone would want her. When she tried to look attractive, she was called a prostitute or a whore. The message was that Meg's sexuality was inappropriate by its very existence. She should not want to be attractive. She should not seek romantic attention. Her desire to be seen as desirable was itself a joke. In one particularly uncomfortable scene, when introducing Middle Eastern guests to the family, Lois gestured to Meg and called her a whore. Not in private, not as an accidental slip. Lois deliberately identified her daughter as a whore to foreign visitors. The guests did not question this. They did not defend Meg. The scene moved on as if calling your teenage daughter a prostitute in front of guests was completely normal. The appearance-based abuse also bled into how other characters physically interacted with Meg. People were no longer just ignoring her or excluding her, they were actively repulsed by her. When Meg tried to participate in family activities, her physical presence was treated as an imposition. When she spoke, people looked away. When she entered a room, the mood soured. The show was teaching its audience that Meg's body, her physical existence in space, was inherently unwelcome. What made this shift so insidious was that it happened gradually. The first few seasons had established that Meg was forgettable and boring. The audience had accepted that baseline. So when Season 4 added appearance-based mockery on top of that, foundation, it felt like a natural progression rather than a sudden escalation. The show had already trained viewers to laugh at Meg's suffering. Adding physical insults just gave them new material to laugh at. The writers also began using Meg's appearance as a punchline in cutaway gags and flashbacks. These short scenes had no connection to the main plot. They existed only to mock Meg. A cutaway might show Meg trying to take a nice photo, only for the camera to malfunction. Or a flashback might show Peter's disappointment at Meg's birth specifically because of how she looked. These moments reinforced the idea that Meg's ugliness was a timeless, unchanging fact, something that had always been true and would always be true. The show made it clear that no amount of effort could fix Meg's appearance problem. She could wear makeup, style her hair, buy new clothes, none of it mattered. She was fundamentally, irredeemably ugly in the eyes of everyone around her. This removed any agency Meg might have had. With the boring jokes, there was at least the implication that Meg could become interesting. But with the ugly jokes, she was trapped. Her physical form was the joke, and there was no escape from your own body. By the end of Season 4, the transformation was complete. Meg was no longer the normal girl in a weird family. She was the ugly daughter that everyone mocked. The show had successfully rebranded her character around this single trait. And once that rebrand was complete, it opened the door for something even worse: physical violence. The appearance-based mockery established that Meg's body was fair game for comedy. If her face could be insulted, her body ridiculed, her physical existence treated as offensive, then why not take the next logical step? Why not have characters actually hurt her body? Why not turn the verbal abuse into physical abuse? Season 4 was the bridge between the early season's neglect and the later season's outright violence. It took the foundation of dismissal and built a structure of body-based humiliation on top of it. It taught the audience that not only was Meg unworthy of love and respect, she was physically repulsive. Her crime was no longer being boring. Her crime was existing in a body that everyone found offensive. The writers had discovered something powerful. Mocking a teenage girl's appearance got laughs. It was easy comedy. You did not need clever wordplay or situational humor. You just needed Peter to look at his daughter and call her ugly. You just needed a doctor to assume her normal face was the result of an accident. You just needed Lois to call Meg a whore while introducing her to Guess. Simple, mean, effective. And if appearance-based mockery got laughs, what else could get laughs? The writers were about to find out, because once they established that Meg's body was a valid target for jokes, they began testing just how far they could push the physical abuse. The verbal insults about her appearance were just the beginning. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Peter Griffin had already shown he was willing to call his daughter ugly, to burn her photos, to agree with strangers who rejected her. Now he was about to show the audience something much darker, just how much physical pain he was willing to inflict on her. And the show was about to demonstrate that there was no limit, no line that would not be crossed, no act of cruelty that was too extreme. Calling Meg ugly had gotten laughs, but hurting Meg's body? That was going to get even bigger laughs. Or at least, that was what the writers believed. Once the show established that Meg was ugly and that mocking her appearance was acceptable comedy, the writers faced a new question. How much further could they push it? The answer came quickly and disturbed many viewers. If verbal abuse got laughs, physical abuse would get bigger laughs. And Peter Griffin, the overweight alcoholic patriarch of the family, became the primary instrument of Meg's physical suffering. Peter had already shown himself capable of emotional cruelty. He called his daughter ugly. He agreed with strangers who rejected her. He burned her photographs. But starting around Season 4 and escalating through the following seasons, Peter crossed a line that separated neglectful father from active abuser. He began physically hurting Meg, repeatedly and deliberately, and the show played it for comedy. The most frequently repeated act of physical abuse was Peter farting in Meg's face. This happened across multiple episodes and became one of his signature methods of humiliating his daughter. In one episode, Quagmire invited Peter and Meg on a weekend father-daughter camping trip with him and his daughter Courtney. Peter was less than enthusiastic about spending time with Meg. The show made that clear through his behavior and dialogue. When they arrived at the campsite, Meg took a deep breath of the fresh mountain air, trying to enjoy the natural beauty around her. As she inhaled, Peter deliberately farted directly in her face. This was not an accident. This was not Peter passing gas and Meg happening to be nearby. Peter positioned himself so that Meg would breathe in his flatulence when she tried to enjoy a moment of peace. The The camera lingered on Meg's disgusted reaction while Peter laughed. This camping trip, which should have been an opportunity for father-daughter bonding, became another opportunity for Peter to physically degrade his child. But farting in Meg's face was just one method. Peter also threw things at her, regularly and without provocation. In multiple episodes, Peter threw glasses of milk directly into Meg's face during family meals. He threw her food at her. He threw random objects. The show never presented these moments as Peter losing his temper or having an emotional outburst. He was calm when he did it. He threw things at Meg the way someone might throw a ball for a dog, casually without thought, as a form of entertainment. In one particularly disturbing scene, Peter literally shoved Meg's face into his backside and farted on her. This was not implied or shown off screen. The animation clearly depicted Peter grabbing his daughter's head, forcing it against his clothed buttocks, and passing gas. The show expected the audience to find this funny. A grown man physically restraining his teenage daughter to force her to smell his bodily functions was presented as acceptable family comedy. The physical abuse extended beyond bodily functions. Peter used Meg's body for his own purposes without any regard for her safety or dignity. In the episode Dial Meg for Murder, Peter decided to compete in a rodeo. But before the competition, he needed to practice. So he used Meg and Chris as practice dummies, treating his children like rodeo equipment. He rode on them, threw them around, and generally subjected them to the physical demands of rodeo training. When Peter actually competed in the rodeo, he was completely destroyed by the bull, proving that all the practice on his children had been worthless. But perhaps the most shocking act of physical abuse came in the episode Model Misbehavior. The Griffin family entered a boat race against Lois's father, Carter Pewterschmidt. They were racing in a makeshift boat, essentially a bathtub with a sail, against Carter's expensive yacht. Predictably, they were losing badly. In an attempt to make their boat lighter and faster, the family started throwing things overboard. First, they threw their luggage, then they threw their life jackets. They were still too heavy. They needed to lose more weight. So Peter grabbed Meg and threw her overboard into the ocean. Not only did he throw his daughter into the water, he threw her without the life jacket he had just forced her to remove. Meg was tossed into the ocean with no flotation device while her family raced away. The show played triumphant music as the Griffin boat gained speed. Everyone cheered when they won the race. No one expressed concern about Meg. No one asked if she was okay. No one went back for her. The show eventually revealed that Meg was fished out of the ocean by someone who mistook her for a manatee, adding insult to the injury of nearly drowning. But the core message was clear. Winning a meaningless boat race was more important than Meg's life. Peter was willing to risk his daughter drowning for a chance at beating his father-in-law. The physical abuse was not always direct violence. Sometimes it was negligence so extreme it became abusive. In one episode, the Griffin family attended a convention similar to Comic-Con. While there, Peter noticed a man who appeared to be dressed as an alien character. Peter thought this was a costume. He forced Meg to stand next to this man so Peter could take a photograph. Peter called the man a space alien guy and positioned Meg right next to him. The man was not wearing a costume. He had the mumps. His swollen face was not makeup or prosthetics. It was a visible symptom of a contagious disease. Meg caught the mumps from this encounter. When the family doctor informed them of Meg's diagnosis, it was revealed that Meg had never received a mumps vaccination. Peter explained this was because he did not love Meg enough to get her vaccinated. Think about what that means. Peter deliberately chose not to protect his daughter from preventable diseases because he did not love her sufficiently. Then, when Meg got sick from his negligence, he showed no remorse. The show did not present this as Peter learning a lesson about the importance of vaccinations. It was just another example of Peter's indifference to Meg's well-being. The abuse also took forms that revealed Peter's deep resentment of Meg's existence. During Stewie's birthday party in one episode, family members were making wishes. Peter's wish was for a meteor to fall from the sky and crush Meg. He said this out loud in front of everyone, including Meg herself. This was not a private thought or a joke made behind Meg's back. Peter publicly wished for his daughter's death, and the show expected the audience to laugh. In another episode, Peter asked God to remove Meg from existence entirely, not to make her different, not to fix whatever Peter thought was wrong with her, to erase her completely. Peter wanted Meg to have never been born. He wanted her deleted from reality. The fact that these wishes were never granted did not make them less cruel. Peter was openly stating that he would prefer a world without his daughter in it. Peter also sold Meg to another family. In one episode, Peter literally sold his daughter to the Goldman family like she was property he owned. Mort Goldman and his family received Meg as if she were a piece of furniture or a pet. Peter no longer wanted. The show did not. Explore the emotional impact on Meg of being sold by her father. It was treated as a quick joke, a funny transaction that meant nothing. The most bizarre act of physical abuse involved a dimensional portal. In the episode Petergeist, Peter found a skull with a Native American headdress. The family discovered their house was built on an Indian burial ground. Peter disrespected the skull in multiple ways. He urinated in it, ate out of it, and threw it around like a toy. As punishment for Peter's actions, Stewie was taken through a dimensional portal. The family discovered the portal to retrieve Stewie was located inside Meg's body, specifically through her backside. Before actually rescuing Stewie, the family used this portal for jokes. They threw a ball through it and watched it come out of Meg's rear end. Peter stuck his head through the portal, emerging from Meg's backside while making jokes. Every time someone used the portal, Meg flinched in pain and discomfort. The family did not care. They prioritized their amusement over Meg's obvious distress. Peter also engaged in emotional abuse that had physical components. In the episode A Fistful of Meg, it was revealed that Peter had vandalized Meg's birth certificate. When Meg was born, Peter changed her name from Megan to Megatron on the official document. This meant that legally, on paper, Meg's real name was Megatron Griffin. Peter thought this was hilarious. He had permanently altered his daughter's legal identity as a joke about a Transformers character. Throughout all of this abuse, Peter never faced consequences. He was never arrested. Child Protective Services never investigated. Lois occasionally told Peter to stop, but she never actually intervened or protected Meg. The other family members watched Peter abuse Meg and did nothing. The show normalized this violence by refusing to acknowledge it as problematic within the world of Family Guy. The physical abuse was not limited to major plot points. It happened in the background of scenes, in quick throwaway gags, in moments that were not even important enough to be the focus of a joke. Peter would casually hit Meg while walking past her. He would knock food out of her hands. He would trip her. The show taught its audience that Peter hurting Meg was so normal, so expected, that it did not even require setup or punchline. It just was. What made Peter's abuse particularly disturbing was that he was the main character. He was not a villain. He was not someone the audience was supposed to hate. Peter Griffin was positioned as a lovable idiot, a well-meaning but stupid father who got into wacky adventures. The show wanted viewers to like Peter, to root for him, to see him as a flawed but fundamentally good person. And yet this good person threw his daughter into the ocean, farted in her face repeatedly, sold her to another family, and wished for her death. The show never reconciled these two versions of Peter. There was no episode where Peter realized he had been abusing Meg and vowed to change. There was no moment of self-awareness where Peter understood the damage he was causing. He just continued hurting Meg, episode after episode, season after season, while the show insisted he was a character worth caring about. By season 8, Peter's physical abuse of Meg had become so normalized that the show could reference it casually. In the episode Seahorse Seashell Party, when Meg finally confronted Peter about his treatment of her, she specifically mentioned that he shoved her face in his backside and farted on it. Meg stated this as established fact, something that happened regularly. Peter did not deny it. He did not claim it was exaggerated. The show acknowledged that yes, this was something Peter did to his daughter. The physical abuse was not portrayed as unusual in the world of Family Guy. Other characters knew about it. They witnessed it. They sometimes participated in it, and they all acted like it was normal. When Peter threw Meg overboard, the rest of the family cheered. When Peter practiced rodeo on Meg, no one stopped him. When Peter farted in Meg's face during the camping trip, Quagmire and his daughter were right there watching it happen, and they said nothing. This created a deeply uncomfortable viewing experience for many fans. They were watching a teenage girl being physically abused by her father, and every character in the show treated it as acceptable. There was no voice of reason saying this was wrong. There was no moment where the universe of Family Guy acknowledged that Peter's behavior was abusive. It was just comedy, just jokes, just Family Guy being Family Guy. Peter's physical abuse represented the midpoint in Meg's degradation. The show had established she was boring in seasons 1 to 3. They escalated to calling her ugly in season 4. And now they were showing her being physically hurt, repeatedly and deliberately. The progression was clear. The show was testing how much abuse the audience would accept. And because the ratings stayed strong, because people kept watching, the writers learned they could push even further. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Peter's physical violence toward Meg was bad, but it was not the worst thing that would happen to her, because Peter was not the only person willing to hurt Meg. He was just the most enthusiastic about it. The abuse was spreading beyond the Griffin household. School, strangers, everyone in Quahog seemed to agree that Meg deserved cruelty. Peter had shown the world that abusing Meg was acceptable, that there were no consequences for hurting her. Now everyone else was going to get their turn. and their participation would prove that Meg's suffering was not just about one bad father or one dysfunctional family. It was about an entire community that had decided this one teenage girl was not worth protecting. And if Meg's only problem was her family, she might have found refuge at school. She could have made friends who appreciated her. She could have found teachers who saw her potential. She could have built a life outside the Griffin household, where she was valued and respected. But Family Guy refused to give Meg even that small mercy. The show made it clear that the entire universe of Quahog, Rhode Island, had agreed that Meg Griffin was worthless. Her family hated her, but so did everyone else. At the center of Meg's high school torment was Connie D'Amico and her group of popular girls. Connie appeared in multiple episodes as the stereotypical mean girl. Attractive, wealthy, cruel, and completely untouchable. She made it her mission to ensure Meg knew exactly where she stood in the social hierarchy of James Woods Regional High School. And where Meg stood was at the very bottom. The bullying from Connie and her friends was relentless and multifaceted. They mocked Meg's appearance constantly. They excluded her from social events. They spread rumors about her. They laughed at her attempts to fit in. In the Season 2 episode, Love Thy Trophy, the popular girls ridiculed Meg for not owning a Prada bag. One girl looked at Meg's regular bag and called it big and ugly. The other girls agreed. Because Meg did not have the right expensive accessory, she was not invited to lunch with them. This scene showed how the bullying worked. It was not about Meg doing anything wrong. She had not insulted anyone. She had not caused problems. She simply did not own the correct brand of purse, and that was enough to justify excluding her. When Meg walked away from the group, rejected and humiliated, a teacher accidentally swung her bag and hit Meg directly in the face. Even the adults at the school, unintentionally or not, contributed to Meg's physical pain. The fact that Meg worked hard to earn money for her own Prada bag, only to be forced to return it later to help her family, made the situation even more cruel. Meg tried to solve the problem. She identified what would make her acceptable to the popular girls, and she worked to get it. But the universe of Family Guy would not allow Meg to have even that small victory. The bullying was not limited to the popular girls. Other students joined in, treating Meg with casual cruelty that suggested her low status was common knowledge throughout the school. A student named Scott slammed his locker directly into Meg's face in one episode. There was no build-up to this moment. Scott did not appear to be angry with Meg or trying to hurt her deliberately. He just closed his locker, and Meg's face happened to be in the way, and he did not care. The scene suggested that people at school were so indifferent to Meg's existence that they could hurt her without even noticing. The teachers were no better. Mr. Burler, a teacher at James Woods Regional High School, stepped on Meg's stomach while she was on the ground. Meg cried, out in pain. Mr. Burler did not stop, did not apologize, did not even acknowledge what he had done. He just kept walking. The message was clear. Even authority figures at the school did not register Meg as a person worth noticing. Principal Shepard, the administrator responsible for student safety and well-being, actively contributed to Meg's suffering. In the episode A Fistful of Meg, which aired in Season 12, Principal Shepard proved just how little he cared about protecting students from violence. In this episode, Meg accidentally bumped into a new student named Michael Pulaski, nicknamed Mental Mike. She spilled her lunch on his jacket. Mental Mike was portrayed as genuinely dangerous. He had apparently killed other students in the past, cried while watching sad movies, and was generally unstable and violent. Mental Mike challenged Meg to a fight scheduled for Friday after school. Instead of stopping this, instead of calling both students into his office and addressing the situation like a responsible administrator, Principal Shepard encouraged it. He made announcements about the fight. He put up signs around the school. One sign read, Meg versus Mental Mike with the date and time. Another sign read, Meg's funeral, with a date right after the fight. The principal was not just allowing violence, he was advertising it, promoting it, and predicting that it would result in Meg's death. Think about what this means within the world of the show. The person responsible for student safety was publicly announcing that a student would be killed on school grounds, and he treated this as entertainment. No other teachers intervened. No other adults at the school questioned why the principal was scheduling a student's murder like it was a sporting event. The entire school system had failed Meg. When Mental Mike actually fought Meg on Friday, a huge crowd gathered to watch. Students cheered as Mental Mike beat Meg nearly to death. They were not horrified. They were not calling for help. They were enjoying watching a teenage girl get brutally assaulted. The school had turned Meg's suffering into a spectator sport, and the student body was happy to watch. The most painful betrayal came from Meg's friends, or rather the people Meg thought were her friends. When Meg first told her friend group about Mental Mike's challenge, they seemed sympathetic. They listened to her fear. They appeared to understand how scared she was. But when it became clear that associating with Meg might put them in danger, her friends immediately abandoned her. One of Meg's friends, Esther, explicitly told Meg that she and the other girls had decided Meg should not talk to them anymore. Another friend, Patty, explained that they could be targeted by association if they remained friends with Meg. Patty added that she did not want to get beaten up by a guy unless it's in a limo after prom. This was presented as a joke, but the meaning was clear. These girls valued their own social standing and physical safety more than their friendship with Meg. These were not background characters. These were girls who appeared in multiple episodes as Meg's friend group. They ate lunch with her. They talked to her in the hallways. They presumably spent time with her outside of school. But when Meg actually needed them, when she was facing genuine danger, they dropped her immediately and without remorse. They told Meg to stop talking to them and walked away. This betrayal showed that Meg had no real friends. She had people who tolerated her presence when it was convenient and cost them nothing. But the moment associating with Meg became socially risky or personally dangerous, those people vanished. Meg was completely alone at school, surrounded by hundreds of students who either hated her or did not care if she died. The students at James Woods Regional High School did not need a reason to hate Meg. She was not mean to them. She did not start rumors or cause drama. She just existed, and that was enough. In hallway scenes throughout the series, students would laugh when Meg walked by. They would whisper and point. They would make disgusted faces. The show never explained why every single student at the school had agreed that Meg deserved contempt. It was just understood. Meg was hateable and everyone at school knew it. Meg could not even find refuge in school activities or clubs. When she tried to participate in things, she was mocked or excluded. When she tried to excel at something, her accomplishments were dismissed or ignored. The few times Meg showed genuine talent, like when she joined the roller derby team or displayed athletic ability, those storylines were quickly overshadowed by the family or ended with Meg being humiliated anyway. The universal contempt extended beyond people Meg knew. Random strangers treated her badly too. People who had never met Meg, who had no history with her, who had no reason to dislike her personally, would treat her with disgust or cruelty the moment they encountered her. The show suggested that there was something about Meg that inspired instant hatred in everyone who saw her. She radiated some quality that made people want to hurt her. When Meg could not get a date to her school dance, the show made it a major humiliation. She asked multiple boys. They all rejected her. She lowered her standards and asked boys she was not even interested in. They still rejected her. Eventually, Meg gave up on finding a human date. She could not even find one boy at her entire school willing to spend a few hours with her at a supervised school event. So Meg brought a pickle wearing a tiny tuxedo. She named it Pickle Date and carried it around like a real companion. The visual of Meg holding a pickle in formal wear should have been sad. It was a desperate teenage girl trying to save face after complete social rejection. But the show played it for laughs. Meg's inability to find human companionship was funny. Her loneliness was a joke. And everyone at school who saw Meg with her pickle date laughed at her. No one felt sorry for her. No one thought maybe they should have accepted her invitation. The school newspaper and other media within the school also participated in mocking Meg. When there were stories or announcements about students, Meg was either ignored or portrayed negatively. If there was a positive story, Meg was not in it. If there was a negative story, Meg was somehow involved. The institutional systems of the school, the announcements, the newsletters, the official communications, all reinforced that Meg was lesser. Teachers assigned Meg to group projects, and other students would complain about being partnered with her. They would try to switch groups. They would do all the work themselves rather than collaborate with Meg. They would ask the teacher if they could work alone instead of with Meg. And teachers would allow it because they understood that forcing students to work with Meg was considered a punishment. Even during assemblies or large gatherings, Meg was isolated. She would sit alone in the auditorium while other students sat with their friends. When students had to pair up for activities, Meg would be left without a partner. Teachers would have to force someone to work with Meg, and that student would make their displeasure obvious. The constant visual reinforcement that Meg had no friends, no allies, no one who chose to be near her was brutal. The abuse at school was different from the abuse at home in one important way. It was public. When Peter farted in Meg's face, it happened in private, or in front of the family. When Lois insulted Meg, it was usually within the Griffin household, but at school, Meg's humiliation played out in front of hundreds of witnesses. Every insult, every rejection, every moment of cruelty happened where the entire student body could see it. This turned Meg's suffering into a shared experience for everyone at school. They all knew she was the girl nobody liked. They all participated in making her life miserable. The cumulative effect of the school abuse was to eliminate any possibility of escape for Meg. Home was terrible. School was terrible. There was no safe place, no refuge, no environment where Meg could just be a normal teenager. Every location, every social context, every situation became another opportunity for people to reinforce that Meg was worthless. The show suggested that this universal contempt was somehow Meg's fault. If everyone hated her, family, friends, classmates, teachers, strangers, then there must be something wrong with Meg, right? The show never seriously explored the alternative explanation, that the people of Quahog were cruel, that the social systems of the town were broken, that maybe the problem was not Meg but everyone else. By making the abuse universal, Family Guy removed any possibility of redemption or rescue for Meg. There was no kind teacher who saw her potential. There was no loyal friend who stood by her. There was no adult authority figure who intervened. Everyone who could have helped Meg chose not to. Everyone who could have made her life better decided to make it worse instead. The school environment also normalized violence against Meg in a way that even the family abuse had not fully achieved. When Peter hurt Meg at home, it was domestic violence within a private family. But when Mental Mike beat Meg nearly to death in front of a cheering crowd while the principal promoted the event with signs, it became public spectacle. The school was teaching students that violence against Meg was not just acceptable, it was entertaining. Mental Mike himself represented the extreme end of what school could do to Meg. He was a genuinely dangerous person who had apparently killed other students. He was unstable, violent, and should have been in a facility that could help him. Not enrolled in a public high school, but Principal Shepard allowed him to attend classes, allowed him to threaten Meg, allowed him to challenge her to a fight that everyone knew would result in severe injury or death. And when the fight happened, no adult stopped it. The fight scene itself was disturbing to watch. Mental Mike punched Meg repeatedly. He threw her to the ground. He beat her while she was down. The crowd cheered every hit. Students were laughing, shouting encouragement to Mike, taking photos and videos. This went on for several minutes while Meg tried desperately to defend herself. She could not fight back effectively. She could not escape. She just had to endure the beating while hundreds of her peers enjoyed watching her suffer. Meg only survived by exposing her breast to Mental Mike, which caused his face to literally melt off in a reference to Raiders of the Lost Ark. The show was saying that Meg's body was so repulsive that seeing it caused physical destruction. Even her method of survival reinforced that she was disgusting. She won the fight not through courage or strength, but by weaponizing her own perceived ugliness. After she won, the school celebrated her victory, but the narrator revealed that Meg died a year later and everyone at school thought it was gross. The cruelty of Meg's school experience proved that Family Guy was not just telling a story about a dysfunctional family. It was building a world where an entire community had agreed to torture one teenage girl. The show wanted viewers to believe that every single person in Quahog, young and old, family and strangers, authority figures and peers, all independently reached the same conclusion about Meg. She deserved suffering. She deserved mockery. She deserved pain. This universal agreement made the abuse feel more justified to some viewers. If everyone treated Meg badly, maybe there really was something wrong with her. The show used the weight of consensus to normalize the cruelty, but that consensus was never examined. No character ever questioned why the whole town hated one harmless teenage girl. They just accepted it and participated. But the school abuse, as bad as it was, represented only one part of Meg's suffering. Because while classmates were mocking her and teachers were stepping on her and principals were scheduling her death, Meg was still going home every day to the Griffin household. And at home, she faced something that made the school abuse look almost mild by comparison. Because at school, at least the abuse came from people who did not claim to love her. At home, the abuse came from the people who were supposed to protect her. And that abuse was about to drive Meg to a breaking point that would change her forever. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The combination of abuse at home and abuse at school created a perfect storm of psychological damage. Meg had no safe place. She had no one who valued her. She was starving for even the smallest amount of affection, for any human being to show her basic kindness. And when you are that desperate for love, that hungry for someone to see you as worthy of care, you will accept attention from anyone who offers it, no matter how inappropriate, dangerous, or manipulative that person might be. Meg's search for affection was about to lead her into some of the most disturbing relationships in Family Guy history, relationships that revealed just how much damage all that abuse had caused to her ability to recognize what healthy love actually looked like. She was unworthy of love. Her family told her this through their actions every single day. Her classmates confirmed it with their mockery and rejection. Teachers and authority figures reinforced it through their indifference. By the time Meg reached her mid-teens, she had internalized the message completely. She believed she was ugly, boring, worthless, and fundamentally unlovable. But human beings need affection. We are social creatures who require connection, validation, and love to function properly. Meg was no different. Despite everything her world told her about her worthlessness, some part of her still hoped that someone, somewhere, might care about her. She still wanted to be loved. She still wanted to matter to another person. And because she had been starved of affection for so long, she became desperate for it. That desperation made Meg vulnerable to anyone who showed her even the smallest amount of kindness. If someone smiled at her, she interpreted it as interest. If someone spoke to her without immediate cruelty, she saw it as a sign of affection. If someone defended her or helped her in any way, she convinced herself they must have romantic feelings for her. This was not Meg being irrational or delusional. This was a traumatized teenager grasping at any possibility of connection because she had been denied it everywhere else. The show exploited this desperation repeatedly, putting Meg into inappropriate, dangerous, and humiliating romantic situations. Each relationship followed the same basic pattern. Someone would show Meg minimal kindness. Meg would become convinced they loved her. She would pursue them with increasing intensity. The other person would reject her, often cruelly. Meg would be humiliated and heartbroken. And then the cycle would repeat with someone new. One of Meg's relationships was with Mayor Adam West, the mayor of Quahog. Adam West was an adult man, decades older than Meg. He held political power in the town. The relationship was deeply inappropriate on every level. Age difference, power imbalance, the fact that Meg was a minor. But the show played it as comedy, as if Meg dating someone her grandfather's age was just another funny example of how desperate and pathetic she was. The relationship ended as they all did, with Meg being rejected and humiliated. In another episode, Meg had an encounter with Jimmy Fallon, the real-life talk show host portrayed as himself in the Family Guy universe. Meg believed that Fallon was genuinely interested in her. She thought they had a connection. She believed he cared about her. The truth was far more cruel. Fallon slept with Meg as part of a prank for his television show. He used her for comedy, filmed their interaction, and broadcast her humiliation to his audience. Meg was not a person to Jimmy Fallon. She was content, a joke, something to exploit for entertainment value. Think about what that experience would do to a person. Meg believed she had finally found someone who saw her as attractive and desirable. She opened herself up emotionally and physically, and then she discovered it was all fake, all a setup, all designed to make millions of people laugh at her. The betrayal was complete. Even when Meg thought she had found real affection, it turned out to be just another form of mockery. But perhaps the most disturbing relationship Meg pursued was with Brian Griffin, her own family's dog. This storyline played out in the Season 5 episode Barely Legal, which aired in November 2006. In this episode, Brian agreed to be Meg's date to her high school junior prom. He did this as a favor, acting as her chaperone rather than a romantic partner. Brian was an adult. Meg was a teenager. Brian was a dog. The situation should not have been romantic under any circumstances. But Brian showed Meg kindness at the prom. When other students mocked her, Brian defended her. When she felt insecure, he reassured her. He treated her with basic decency and respect. For Meg, who received neither decency nor respect from anyone else in her life, this was revolutionary. Brian's simple act of being nice to her at the dance was the most positive attention Meg had received from anyone in years. Meg interpreted Brian's kindness as romantic interest. After the dance, with a little bit of alcohol in his system and Meg feeling vulnerable and grateful, they shared a kiss. Brian immediately recognized this as a mistake. He tried to make it clear to Meg that it was a one-time thing, that he did not have romantic feelings for her, that they could not and should not pursue a relationship. He was gentle about it, trying not to hurt her feelings while firmly establishing boundaries. Meg could not accept this. She refused to believe that Brian did not love her. In her mind, he had shown her kindness and affection. He had kissed her, so he must want to be with her. She convinced herself that Brian was confused or scared or in denial about his feelings. She decided that if she just pursued him hard enough, if she just showed him how much she cared, he would realize they were meant to be together. What followed was Meg stalking Brian throughout the Griffin house. She would appear wherever he was. She would stare at him. She would try to create romantic moments. She left notes for him. She called him constantly. She showed up uninvited when he was trying to do other things. Brian became genuinely frightened. He started hiding from Meg in his own home. He would check rooms before entering to make sure she was not there. He would take alternative routes through the house to avoid her. The situation escalated until Meg kidnapped Brian. She literally took him against his will and held him captive. The show played this for comedy, but strip away the jokes and you have a teenage girl so desperate for love that she committed a serious crime. Meg had become so damaged by abuse and neglect that she could not recognize what healthy affection looked like. She thought kidnapping someone and forcing them to spend time with her was a valid way to pursue a relationship. Eventually, Lois had to intervene. She found Meg holding Brian captive and talked her down. Lois explained to Meg that Brian did not love her romantically, that what Meg was doing was wrong, that she needed to let him go. Meg finally released Brian and accepted that they would not be together. But the damage was done. Meg had revealed just how distorted her understanding of love had become. Years of abuse had broken something fundamental in her ability to form healthy attachments. The Brian situation was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Meg became obsessed with multiple people throughout the series, always following the same trajectory. Someone showed her kindness. She became convinced they loved her. She pursued them with increasing intensity. They rejected her. She was devastated, and then she moved on to the next person, having learned nothing except that she was still unlovable. Neil Goldman, a nerdy student at James Woods Regional High School, was obsessed with Meg for several seasons. Unlike Meg's other love interests, Neil actually wanted to be with her. He pursued her constantly. He wrote her poetry. He tried to impress her. He made his romantic interest abundantly clear. For once, Meg had someone who genuinely wanted her attention. But when Meg finally agreed to spend time with Neil, the relationship was immediately corrupted. Neil told Meg that she needed to fulfill her contractual obligations. He treated their relationship like a business transaction, like Meg owed him something because he had been interested in her for so long. Even the one person at school who claimed to love Meg saw her as an object, a thing that could be obligated to provide services in exchange for attention. Meg's most dangerous relationship was with a prison inmate. This storyline played out across the season 8 episode Dial Meg for Murder. Meg had started writing letters to a prisoner as part of a pen pal program. The convict's name was Luke, and he was in prison for unspecified crimes. Through their letters, Meg developed feelings for him. When Luke escaped from prison, he came to the Griffin house to see Meg. Think about what this situation represented. Meg was so desperate for affection that she fell in love with a convicted criminal she had never met in person. She only knew him through letters, through carefully curated words on paper that allowed him to present himself however he wanted. She had no way to verify his character, his honesty, or his intentions, but because he had shown her attention through his letters, she believed he genuinely cared about her. When Luke arrived at the house, Meg hid him from her family. She harbored an escaped prisoner knowing it was illegal because she believed this was true love. She risked everything, her freedom, her future, her safety, for a man she barely knew. Brian eventually discovered Luke hiding in Meg's room and told the rest of the family. Peter called the police. Joe Swanson, the police officer who lived next door, came and arrested Luke. He arrested Meg too as an accessory for harboring a fugitive. Meg went to prison. She was sentenced to 3 months in a juvenile detention facility for her crime. Think about the chain of events that led to this. Meg was so starved for affection that she developed romantic feelings for a criminal through letters. She committed a serious crime to protect him. She went to prison because she thought hiding an escaped convict was a reasonable thing to do for someone she loved. Every decision in this chain was driven by her desperate need for someone, anyone, to care about her. When Meg returned from prison 3 months later, she was a different person. But that transformation and its consequences would define her next chapter in ways no one expected. There were other relationships too, each one revealing new depths of Meg's desperation. Michael Milano was a medical student who showed Meg some attention. She fell for him immediately. When Meg thought she was pregnant, it turned out to be just her period, but she did not know that at the time. Michael proposed marriage. Meg was thrilled. Finally, someone wanted to commit to her, wanted to build a life with her. But on the day of their wedding, when Meg revealed she was not actually pregnant, Michael ran away. He literally fled the ceremony. He had only proposed because he thought he had gotten her pregnant. Once he knew there was no baby, he had no reason to stay with Meg. Then there was Ivan, a man from Russia who entered Meg's life through an online scam. Ivan hacked Brian's computer and somehow ended up connecting with Meg. Despite the suspicious circumstances of how they met, despite the warning signs, Meg fell for Ivan. She believed he loved her. She believed they had a real connection. When Ivan proposed, Meg said yes immediately. She left her home and her life behind to move to Russia and marry him. Living in Russia, Meg tried to build a life with Ivan. She learned about his culture. She tried to fit into his world. She was willing to leave behind everything familiar because she finally had someone who wanted her. But eventually Meg discovered the truth. Ivan did not love her. He was using her for a green card marriage. He wanted American citizenship, and marrying Meg was the easiest way to get it. Once again, someone had pretended to love Meg for their own purposes. Unlike previous betrayals, Meg did not just accept this one quietly. She had Ivan assassinated. She arranged for Russian soldiers to kill him. This was a shocking escalation. Meg had gone from desperate victim to someone capable of ordering murder. The show played this for dark comedy, but it revealed something important. The abuse and betrayals had pushed Meg past a breaking point. She was no longer willing to just suffer and accept mistreatment. She was starting to fight back, even if that fighting back took extreme and violent forms. Every single one of Meg's relationships ended the same way. She gave everything, her trust, her body, her freedom, her safety, and received nothing but betrayal and humiliation in return. The pattern repeated so many times that it stopped being sad and started being inevitable. Of course, Meg's relationships would fail. Of course, the people she loved would use her. Of course, she would be left heartbroken and alone. That was just what happened to Meg Griffin. The show never explored the psychological damage these repeated betrayals caused. Meg was not given therapy or support or help processing her trauma. She just moved from one disastrous relationship to the next, each one confirming what her family had always told her. She was unlovable. The only people who showed her attention were those who wanted to use her, mock her, or exploit her. No one actually cared about Meg as a person. What made these relationship storylines particularly cruel was that they took a real psychological phenomenon, trauma bonding and desperate attachment, and used it for comedy. Real people who grow up in abusive environments often struggle with relationships in exactly the ways Meg did. They misinterpret kindness as love. They accept mistreatment because they think they do not deserve better. They stay with dangerous or manipulative partners because any attention feels better than being alone. Family Guy took those real struggles and made them into jokes. Meg's inability to recognize healthy love was funny. Her desperate pursuit of anyone who showed her kindness was comedy. Her willingness to accept terrible treatment from romantic partners was entertainment. The show mocked the very damage it had spent years inflicting on her character. The dating disasters also revealed that Meg had no one to teach her what healthy relationships looked like. Lois and Peter's marriage was a disaster. They insulted each other. Peter frequently cheated or tried to cheat. Lois stole Meg's boyfriend in one episode. The example Meg saw at home was that relationships involved contempt, betrayal, and dysfunction. No wonder she could not recognize red flags in her own romantic life. By the time Meg had cycled through multiple failed relationships, she had learned to expect betrayal. She went into new relationships already knowing they would end badly, but she pursued them anyway because even temporary fake affection felt better than nothing. She would rather be used and betrayed than remain completely alone. The abuse had taught her that she did not deserve real love, so she settled for whatever scraps of attention people were willing to give her. The prison experience with Luke, though, marked a turning point. Meg had committed a crime for love. She had gone to prison. She had spent 3 months in a juvenile detention facility, surrounded by actual criminals, cut off from her family and her life. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The prison experience would change her in ways that would shock everyone who knew her. Because when Meg came home from prison, she was not the same desperate, passive girl who had left. The girl who would accept any treatment, who would chase anyone who showed her kindness, who would let the world walk all over her. That Meg was gone. In her place was someone harder, meaner, and far more dangerous. Someone who had finally learned that if everyone was going to treat her like garbage anyway, she might as well fight back. And when Meg Griffin finally decided to fight back after years of abuse, the results would be violent, shocking, and would force the Griffin family to confront exactly what they had created. When Meg Griffin walked through the front door of the Griffin house after 3 months in juvenile detention, her family barely recognized her. The girl who had left, desperate for approval, willing to accept any treatment, passive in the face of cruelty, was gone. In her place stood someone who looked like Meg but moved differently, spoke differently, carried herself with an energy the family had never seen before. Prison had not broken Meg, it had hardened her. And the Griffin family was about to learn what happens when you abuse someone for so long that they finally stop caring about consequences. The episode Dial Meg for Murder aired on January 31st, 2010, as the 11th episode of Family Guy's 8th season. The main plot followed Meg's transformation from victim to aggressor, showing in explicit detail what years of systematic abuse had created. This was not a redemption arc. This was not Meg finding inner strength and becoming a better person. This was a damaged teenager becoming dangerous, violent, and cruel, essentially becoming a mirror of the family that had raised her. Meg's time in prison was not shown in detail during the episode. The audience did not see what happened to her during those 3 months. But when she returned home, the changes were immediately obvious. She walked with confidence. She spoke with authority. She looked at her family members not with the usual desperate hope for approval, but with contempt and anger. Something fundamental had shifted. Meg had spent 3 months surrounded by actual criminals, people who had committed real crimes, people who survived through violence and intimidation, and she had learned from them. The first sign that something was wrong came when Meg walked into the living room where the family had gathered. Peter, seeing his daughter for the first time since her arrest, greeted her with his usual dismissive attitude. He made a joke. He said something cruel. The family expected Meg to accept it the way she always had, quietly, passively, maybe with a sad look, but ultimately with resignation. That was how Meg always responded to Peter's cruelty. Not this time. Meg did not cry. She did not shrink away. She did not try to laugh it off or change the subject. Instead, she walked directly up to Peter and punched him in the face. Hard. Peter, shocked and confused, stumbled backward. Before he could react, Meg hit him again and again. She'd beat her father with a level of violence the family had never seen from her before. Peter, who had spent years throwing things at Meg, farting in her face and verbally abusing her, now found himself on the receiving end of physical violence, and he had no idea how to respond. When Peter finally managed to speak, Meg made her position clear. She declared herself the new authoritative figure in the house. She was done being the family punching bag. She was done accepting mistreatment. She was done being the weak one, the pathetic one, the one everyone could hurt without consequence. From now on, Meg was in charge, and anyone who disagreed with that assessment would face the same treatment Peter had just received. The family initially thought this was temporary. They thought Meg would calm down, that this aggressive phase would pass, that she would eventually return to being the Meg they knew. But Meg was just getting started. Over the following scenes, she systematically demonstrated her newfound willingness to use violence and intimidation to get what she wanted. In one of the most disturbing scenes in Family Guy history, Meg followed Peter into the bathroom while he was taking a shower. Peter, already unnerved by Meg's transformation, became genuinely frightened when she entered the bathroom. He asked her what she was doing. He told her to leave. He tried to assert parental authority, telling her this was inappropriate, that she needed to respect his privacy. Meg did not leave. She grabbed a loofah, a rough, scratchy bath sponge, and got into the shower with Peter. What happened next was sexual assault. Meg used the loofah on Peter in a violent, invasive way while he begged her to stop. The show did not depict this graphically, but the implication was clear. Meg was using sexual violence to assert dominance over her father. She was showing him that she could violate him the way he had violated her boundaries for years. Peter's screams could be heard throughout the house, but no one came to help him. After the shower assault, Meg calmly explained to Peter that she had done this to establish dominance. She used the language of prison culture, talking about showing strength, establishing hierarchy, making it clear who was in charge. Peter, traumatized by what had just happened, could only whimper in response. The dynamic had completely reversed. Peter, who had terrorized Meg for years, was now terrified of his own daughter. But Meg's violence was not limited to Peter. She went after everyone who had ever hurt her. She tracked down the popular girls at school who had bullied her for years. Connie D'Amico and her friends, who had mocked Meg's appearance and excluded her from social events, now faced Meg's wrath. Meg found them at school and beat them up. She did not just push them or slap them. She delivered serious, brutal beatdowns that left the popular girls injured and terrified. The bullies who had once laughed at Meg now ran from her. Students at James Woods Regional High School who had treated her with contempt for years suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. They avoided eye contact in the hallways. They gave her space. They treated her with fear, if not respect. Meg had achieved something through violence that she never could through trying to fit in. People paid attention to her. They remembered her name. They talked about her. She mattered. At home, Meg's reign of terror continued. She used Lois's expensive designer shirts as toilet paper, ruining them deliberately while Lois watched in horror. When Lois tried to protest, Meg simply stared at her with dead eyes until Lois backed down. Meg was demonstrating that nothing was sacred, that no one's belongings or boundaries would be respected. She was treating the family the way they had treated her, with complete disregard for their feelings or possessions. Stewie, the violent genius baby who had spent years casually abusing Meg, along with the rest of the family, suddenly found himself in Meg's crosshairs. Meg ordered Peter to punch Stewie in the face. Peter, now completely under Meg's control through fear, obeyed. He walked over to his infant son and punched him. Stewie, shocked that Peter would actually hit him, looked up to see Meg watching with satisfaction. The message was clear. If Meg told you to do something, you did it, no matter how wrong or cruel it might be. Throughout all of this, Lois tried repeatedly to talk to Meg, to understand what had happened in prison, to reach the daughter she thought she knew. But every attempt at conversation ended the same way. Meg would either ignore Lois completely or respond with thinly veiled threats. When Lois tried to assert maternal authority, Meg laughed in her face. The hierarchy in the Griffin household had been completely inverted. The person with the least power, the family scapegoat, had become the most dangerous person in the house. The violence escalated when Meg decided she had had enough of living with the family that had abused her for so long. She announced her intention to leave Quahog permanently. She needed money for this plan, and she decided to get it through crime. Meg planned to rob Goldman's pharmacy, the local drugstore owned by Mort Goldman and his family. This was not a desperate, unplanned crime of passion. Meg thought it through, planned it carefully, and prepared to execute it with cold efficiency. Brian, the family dog who had always positioned himself as the intellectual voice of reason, finally decided to intervene. Brian had watched Meg's transformation with growing concern. Unlike the rest of the family, who were simply scared of Meg, Brian seemed to understand that something deeper was happening. He recognized that Meg's violence was not random evil. It was a response to years of trauma. But he also knew that if Meg actually robbed the pharmacy, if she committed another serious crime, she would go back to prison for much longer than 3 months. Brian found Meg as she was preparing to execute the robbery. She was holding a gun, something the audience had never seen Meg possess before. The fact that Meg had somehow acquired a firearm showed just how far she had fallen. She was not just threatening violence anymore. She was prepared to use lethal force if necessary. Brian tried to talk her down, to convince her that robbing the pharmacy was a mistake, that this was not who she really was. Meg did not want to hear it. She forced Brian into his own car at gunpoint and made him drive her to Goldman's pharmacy. Brian, terrified but still trying to reach Meg, attempted to reason with her during the drive. He pointed out that she would get caught, that she would go back to prison, that this violence was destroying her. Meg did not care. She had accepted that her life was already destroyed. She had accepted that no one really loved her, that nothing would ever get better, that the abuse would never stop. So why not take what she wanted? Why not hurt the people who had hurt her? What did she have to lose? When they arrived at the pharmacy, Meg got out of the car and prepared to go inside. Brian made one last desperate attempt to stop her. He told Meg that she was wrong about no one caring for her. He said he cared about her. Meg, hearing this, laughed bitterly. She had heard promises before. She had believed people cared before. It always turned out to be a lie or a setup or another way to hurt her. But Brian had evidence. He told Meg about an article he had written about her. Earlier in the episode, Brian had gotten a job writing for a teen magazine called Teen People. His editor had asked him to write about the average American teenage girl, and Brian had chosen Meg as his subject. He had been observing her, taking notes about her life, trying to understand her experiences. He had written a long article analyzing Meg's life, her struggles, her resilience, her quiet strength in the face of constant cruelty. Brian showed Meg the article. She read it, and for the first time since returning from prison, Meg's hard exterior cracked. The article was not mocking or cruel. It was not another setup or prank. Brian had genuinely tried to understand Meg and write about her with empathy and respect. He had seen her as a person, not as a joke or a punching bag or a thing to exploit. The article proved that at least one person in her world actually saw her, actually cared about her, actually thought she was worth writing about seriously. Meg started crying. The walls she had built in prison, the toughness she had adopted to survive, the violence she had embraced as her only form of power, all of it fell away. She was just a teenage girl again, hurt and confused and desperate to be loved. She had not wanted to become violent. She had not enjoyed hurting people. She had done it because she saw no other way to make the pain stop. But Brian's article showed her that there was another way. Someone could care about her without her having to threaten or intimidate them. Brian told Meg that the article proved he cared about her just as she was, not as the violent person she had become in prison, not as the family punching bag she had been before, just as Meg, as the actual human being underneath all the trauma and defense mechanisms. This simple act of recognition, of seeing Meg as worthy of attention and care, was enough to pull her back from the edge. Meg gave up on robbing the pharmacy. She gave up on running away. She gave up on the violence and intimidation she had been using to control her family. She agreed to return to the Griffin house and try to rebuild some kind of normal relationship with them. Brian's kindness, his genuine, non-manipulative, non-exploitative kindness, had done what 3 months of prison could not. It had reminded Meg that she was human, that she deserved better than constant cruelty, that violence was not the answer. The episode ended with an uneasy peace. Meg was no longer actively terrorizing the family, but the dynamics had shifted in ways that could not be completely undone. The Griffins had seen what Meg was capable of when pushed too far. They had experienced fear of her, had felt what it was like to be on the receiving end of physical violence from someone they had dismissed as weak and pathetic. For a brief period, they had understood what Meg's life felt like. But the show never explored whether this experience taught the family anything. The episode did not end with Peter apologizing for years of abuse. Lois did not promise to treat Meg better. Chris and Stewie did not acknowledge their role in making Meg's life miserable. The family simply accepted that Meg was back to normal, and they moved on. The abuse would continue in later episodes as if this transformation had never happened. What Dial Meg for Murder revealed was the natural endpoint of systematic abuse. The victim eventually breaks. Years of cruelty had created a monster. Meg had learned through prison that violence was power, that fear was respect, that hurting people before they could hurt you was survival. The Griffin family's treatment of Meg had psychologically damaged her so severely that she briefly became as cruel as they were. She had learned from the best. The episode also showed something important about cycles of abuse. Meg's violence was not random or senseless. She targeted the people who had hurt her. She used the same methods on them that they had used on her. Peter had assaulted her dignity repeatedly, so she assaulted him. The popular girls had humiliated her publicly, so she humiliated them with violence. The family had disrespected her belongings and boundaries, so she destroyed their belongings and violated their boundaries. Meg had become a mirror reflecting the family's cruelty back at them. But unlike her family, Meg could be reached with genuine kindness. When Brian showed her real care, real interest, real empathy, she responded by giving up her plans for violence and revenge. This suggested something the show would never fully explore, that Meg was not fundamentally bad or broken. She was just responding to her environment. When that environment was abusive, she became abusive. When someone showed her authentic care, she responded to that too. The episode was controversial when it aired. Some viewers found it satisfying to see Meg fight back. Others were disturbed by how graphically the show depicted Meg's violence, particularly the sexual assault scene in the shower. Critics pointed out that the episode came close to saying something meaningful about abuse and its consequences, but then backed away by having Meg return to normal by the end. Nothing really changed. The family learned nothing. Meg's brief period of power was just a temporary disruption before status quo was restored. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But even more explosive than this temporary violent outbreak was still to come. Because while Dial Meg for Murder showed Meg physically fighting back against her abusers, there was another episode waiting in the wings that would show Meg verbally fighting back in the most devastating way possible. An episode where Meg would use words instead of fists to tear her family apart, where she would finally speak the truth about what they had done to her, where she would force them to confront the reality of their cruelty. And the way that episode ended would become one of the most controversial moments in the entire history of Family Guy. On October 2nd, 2011, Family Guy aired what would become one of its most controversial episodes ever. Seahorse Seashell Party was the second episode of Season 10, and it promised something viewers had been waiting for since the show began. Meg Griffin finally, standing up to her family and telling them exactly what they had done to her. For once, Meg would not be silent. She would not accept the abuse passively. She would speak the truth about years of cruelty, and her family would have to listen. The episode started with a hurricane approaching Quahog, Rhode Island. The Griffin family prepared to ride out the storm together, forced to stay inside their house for safety. With no electricity, no television, and nowhere to go, they had to find ways to pass the time. Peter made strange noises that he called dad noises for over a minute. The family tried to play games. They attempted to have conversations. The tension in the house built as hours passed with the family trapped together. In a subplot that had nothing to do with Meg, Brian Griffin secretly consumed magic mushrooms and spent most of the episode hallucinating terrifying visions. This storyline was disturbing and darkly animated, but it was ultimately irrelevant to the main story. The important action happened between Meg and the rest of her family. The breaking point came when the family decided to play a game they called Finger Bang. Peter, Lois, and Chris all participated enthusiastically, pretending to shoot each other with finger guns while shouting and laughing. Meg tried to join in. She wanted to be part of the family activity. She pointed her fingers like a gun and tried to play along. Peter immediately shut her down. He told Meg that no one wanted to get finger banged by her. The rest of the family agreed. They made it clear that Meg was not welcome to participate in their game. She could sit there and watch them have fun, but she could not join. This was not a new dynamic. The family had been excluding Meg from activities for years, but something about this particular moment, this casual cruelty delivered while they were all trapped together with nowhere to escape, finally broke something inside Meg. Meg did not cry or run to her room the way she normally did. Instead, she stayed in the living room and began to speak. Slowly at first, then with increasing intensity, Meg started telling her family exactly what she thought of them. She began with Chris, her younger brother, who had spent years saying hurtful things to her for no apparent reason. Meg asked Chris why he treated her like he hated her. She pointed out that he was supposed to be on her side as her brother, but instead he was cruel to her constantly. She asked if he had any idea what that felt like, to have your own sibling act like you were worthless. Chris, caught off guard by Meg's directness, did not know how to respond. He stammered and tried to deflect. Peter, still thinking this was funny, made jokes while Meg was trying to have a serious conversation. But Meg was just getting started. She turned her attention to Lois, and what she said to her mother was devastating. Meg asked Lois if she really thought she was in a position to criticize anyone. She reminded Lois of all the terrible things Lois had done, the shoplifting, the drug use, the pornography, the infidelity. Meg laid out her mother's entire history of bad behavior and asked how someone with that past could possibly have the nerve to constantly point out Meg's shortcomings. Lois tried to defend herself by saying those things were in her past, that she was a better person now because of those experiences. But Meg was not buying it. She pointed out that Lois had spent 17 years ruthlessly criticizing Meg while conveniently ignoring her own massive character flaws. The hypocrisy was staggering. Lois had no moral authority to judge anyone, yet she had spent nearly 2 decades making Meg feel worthless. Then Meg said something that cut even deeper. She told Lois that from the moment Meg was born, she had needed her mother to protect her, to guide her, to help her navigate the difficult journey of becoming a person. And Lois had done none of those things. Lois had failed at the most basic responsibilities of motherhood. She had taken a child's trust and destroyed it over 17 years of neglect and cruelty. Meg told Lois that when she turned 18, she was seriously considering cutting off all contact with her mother forever. She might never want to see Lois again once she was legally free to leave. The relationship was that damaged, that broken, that beyond repair. Lois, finally understanding how deeply she had hurt her daughter, broke down crying. She admitted she was a terrible mother. She apologized over and over, sobbing, as the reality of what she had done finally hit her. Peter, watching his wife cry, tried to get Meg to stop. He whispered something to Meg about Lois not being allowed to stir the paint anymore, some cryptic reference to their marriage that Meg apparently understood. But Meg was not done. She had more to say, and this time she was going to say it to Peter's face. Meg turned to her father and unleashed everything she had been, holding back for years. She called Peter completely selfish and totally irresponsible as a father. She pointed out that he had no education and no interest beyond whatever reckless thing he wanted to do in the moment. He did whatever he wanted without any regard for how it affected other people. And when he was not terrorizing the community with his impulsive behavior, he was being a total jerk to his own family. Meg specifically mentioned that Peter shoved her face in his backside and farted on her. She made it clear this was not an exaggeration or a one-time thing. This was behavior Peter engaged in regularly. She told Peter that if someone from outside the family could see how he treated her, he would be in jail. His treatment of his daughter was genuinely criminal, genuinely abusive, genuinely illegal. Only the privacy of the family home protected Peter from facing consequences for what he did to Meg. Peter, who had been laughing and joking throughout most of Meg's speech, finally began to realize she was actually criticizing him. In a moment of perfectly executed comedy, Peter said he liked where this was going, completely misunderstanding that Meg was attacking him. She continued, calling Peter a fat, lazy, abusive father who drank too much and barely made enough money to support his family. She told him he had lived half his life and had nothing to show for it except his kids, and they were a disaster. Meg called Peter a complete embarrassment in every possible way. She told him to take a good look at himself. Then she delivered the final blow. She called Peter a waste of a man. That phrase finally penetrated Peter's thick skull. He suddenly understood these were criticisms. He looked to Lois for help, asking her to tell Meg to stop. But Lois, still crying from her own confrontation with Meg, refused. She asked Peter where he had been when Meg was attacking her. Peter admitted he had been thinking about getting a fancy cane to get more attention from strangers. With both parents reeling from Meg's words, the family dynamic completely collapsed. Without Meg as their shared target, Peter and Lois turned on each other. They started arguing about who was the worst parent. Chris joined in, defending one parent and attacking the other. The entire family devolved into screaming at each other, blaming each other, bringing up years of resentments and failures. Peter, unable to handle the conflict, ran to his room crying. The family was destroying itself. Everything Meg had said was true and they could not argue with it. So instead of accepting responsibility and trying to change, they turned their rage on each other. The house descended into chaos. The family that had functioned, however dysfunctionally, was falling apart. and it was falling apart because Meg had removed herself as their punching bag. Later, after the fighting had died down, Brian found Meg alone. He told her that what she had done was brave, that she had spoken, difficult truths that needed to be said. But Meg was not happy. She was devastated. She had seen what happened when she stopped absorbing the family's dysfunction. Without her as a target, they had turned on each other like animals. The family could not function without someone to blame, someone to mock, someone to treat as lesser. Meg told Brian she had a theory. She wondered if it was possible that the family could not survive without some sort of lightning rod to absorb all the dysfunction. Maybe it was not ideal, but maybe it was an important piece. Maybe it was just her lot in life to provide that service. If she felt bad, maybe they did not have to. Brian, instead of pushing back against this terrible logic, told Meg this was incredibly noble and mature of her. He said she might be the strongest person in the house. So Meg made a choice. She went back to her family and apologized for everything she had said. She told them she had been taking her own problems out on them. She said none of them had done anything wrong. She took back every true word she had spoken. She volunteered to return to her role as the family scapegoat, the lightning rod that absorbed their abuse so they did not have to hurt each other. The family immediately accepted her apology. They did not reflect on anything Meg had said. They did not promise to treat her better. They did not acknowledge their behavior was wrong. They simply went back to normal, with Meg at the bottom, and everyone else free to mock her, hurt her, and blame her for their problems. Peter even called Meg a vulgar insult as soon as she finished apologizing. Meg accepted it. She agreed that yes, she was that insult. Everything was back to how it had been. The episode ended with the family together, the hurricane over, the crisis passed. Nothing had changed except now the audience knew the truth. Meg understood she was being abused. She knew her family was terrible to her. She knew she deserved better, but she had chosen to accept the abuse anyway because she believed it kept the family together. The show presented this as a noble sacrifice rather than a tragedy. The critical response to Seahorse Seashell Party was overwhelmingly negative. Kevin McFarland of the AV Club gave the episode a grade of D+. He wrote that nobody cared about the Griffin family the way audiences cared about other TV families. He felt bad about Meg becoming the scapegoat, not because she was a good character, but because the show had spent years taking the path of least resistance instead of making her valuable or interesting. One episode trying to justify that shift changed nothing. Critics pointed out that the episode came close to making a real statement about abuse and family dysfunction, but then completely undermined itself with the ending. The show seemed to genuinely believe that Meg's decision to continue accepting abuse was noble and mature. There was no irony, no suggestion that this was wrong, no indication that the audience should be disturbed by this resolution. The episode presented the moral as, abusive families need someone to abuse, and the strongest person is the one willing to be abused for everyone else's benefit. This was an absolutely terrible message. It told abuse victims that staying in abusive situations was noble. It suggested that keeping abusive families together was more important than protecting yourself. It implied that the person being abused should sacrifice themselves to prevent abusers from hurting each other. Every part of this moral was wrong and dangerous and harmful. Other critics were equally harsh. One review said the episode spent a lot of time addressing something that did not need to be addressed. Another pointed out that if the show had actually wanted to explore Meg's abuse meaningfully, they could have had the family change their behavior rather than having Meg accept her fate. The consensus was that Seahorse Seashell Party was one of the worst episodes Family Guy had ever produced. What made the episode particularly frustrating was that Meg's speech was genuinely powerful. When she confronted her family, when she laid out their failures and hypocrisies, when she spoke truth to power, those moments worked dramatically. Mila Kunis, Meg's voice actress, delivered the lines with real emotion. The writing was sharp and specific. For a few minutes, it seemed like Family Guy was finally going to do something meaningful with Meg's character. But then the ending threw all of that away. The episode acknowledged that Meg was abused, confirmed that she knew she was abused, had her abusers admit they were terrible people, and then said she should keep accepting the abuse anyway. It was a betrayal of the character, a betrayal of the audience, and a betrayal of anyone who had ever experienced family abuse and hoped to see it portrayed honestly. The lightning rod theory itself was deeply flawed. The idea that families need someone to abuse or they will fall apart is not psychology. It is an excuse for abuse. Healthy families do not need scapegoats. Functional families do not require one member to suffer so everyone else can be okay. The show presented this toxic dynamic as if it were an inevitable truth about how families work, when in reality it was just describing one specific type of deeply dysfunctional family system. Many viewers who had experienced family scapegoating found the episode painful to watch. They recognized Meg's situation from their own lives. They had been the lightning rod in their own families. And the show was telling them that leaving, that protecting themselves, that refusing to accept abuse, all of those healthy choices would destroy their families. It was a message that could actually harm real people by making them feel guilty for escaping abuse. The episode also revealed that the show's creators did not understand or did not care about the implications of what they were depicting. They thought they were making an episode about Meg being strong and mature. They thought they were showing her as noble and self-sacrificing. They did not seem to realize they were showing a teenage abuse victim choosing to stay in an abusive situation and presenting that choice as correct. Seahorse Seashell Party became a turning point in how many viewers thought about Family Guy's treatment of Meg. Before this episode, people could argue that the abuse was just comedy, just jokes, not meant to be taken seriously. But this episode made it serious. It had Meg explicitly call out the abuse. It had her family admit they were terrible. And then it had everyone agree that the abuse should continue. The show could no longer claim the abuse was meaningless or harmless. They had acknowledged it was real, and they had said it was necessary. The episode stood as proof that the writers knew exactly what they were doing to Meg's character. They understood it was abuse. They understood it was wrong. And they chose to continue it anyway, wrapped in a thin justification about family unity. The lightning rod speech was not the show finally recognizing its treatment of Meg was problematic. It was the show creating a justification for why that treatment would continue forever. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But as bad as Seahorse Seashell Party was, as offensive as its message was, there was still one more episode that would take Meg's humiliation even further. An episode that would not just have Meg accept the abuse, but would make the abuse itself the source of her only victory. An episode where Meg would win a fight not through courage or skill, but by weaponizing the very thing her family had always mocked her for, her supposed physical repulsiveness. And that episode would force viewers to confront just how cruel Family Guy's treatment of Meg had truly become. Seahorse Seashell Party was the show acknowledging that Meg was abused and then justifying why it should continue. A Fistful of Meg was the show taking the next logical step. This episode, which aired on November 10th, 2013 as the 4th episode of Season 12, did something even more disturbing than having Meg accept her abuse. It made Meg's abuse feel earned. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, the family and the world were right about her all along. The episode opened with Meg at James Woods Regional High School, navigating the hallways between classes. Her friends were telling her about a new student who had just transferred to the school. His name was Michael Pulaski, but everyone called him Mental Mike. The nickname was not affectionate or ironic. Mike was genuinely dangerous, genuinely unstable, genuinely violent. The students spoke about him with real fear in their voices. Meg's friends listed the things Mental Mike had done to establish his reputation. He had apparently stabbed a kid on the playground, then beaten up the knife. He could watch the television show Friday Night Lights without crying, which the students treated as evidence of his lack of human emotion. These descriptions painted Mike as someone completely disconnected from normal human feelings, someone capable of extreme violence without remorse or hesitation. He was not a typical high school bully. He was legitimately dangerous. Meg saw Mental Mike in action shortly after this conversation. She watched him interact with Neil Goldman, the nerdy student who had been obsessed with Meg in earlier seasons. Mike twisted Neil's body into impossible positions, bending him like a balloon animal in a visual gag that referenced old Looney Tunes cartoons. But underneath the cartoon violence was a real threat. Mike was strong enough and cruel enough to seriously hurt people, and he did not care who saw him do it. Later that same day, Meg was carrying her lunch tray through the cafeteria. The cafeteria was crowded, as school cafeterias always are, with students rushing in different directions, trying to find seats with their friends, balancing food and drinks in backpacks. In the chaos of the lunch rush, Meg accidentally bumped into Mental Mike. Her lunch tray tilted and food spilled onto Mike's jacket. This was a complete accident. Meg had not seen Mike. She had not targeted him deliberately. She had not intended to spill anything on anyone. It was the kind of minor accident that happens in crowded spaces, the kind of thing that normal people apologize for, maybe help clean up, and then forget about 5 minutes later. But Mental Mike was not normal, and he did not react the way a reasonable person would react. Mike looked at the food on his jacket, then he looked at Meg. His expression was cold and blank. Without raising his voice, without showing any particular anger, Mike told Meg that he was going to fight her. Not right now, but Friday after school. He gave her the exact time and place. He told her to be there. The way he spoke made it clear this was not a request or a suggestion. It was a command, an inevitability, something that would happen whether Meg wanted it to or not. Meg tried to explain it was an accident. She apologized. She offered to clean his jacket, but Mike did not care. He had decided Meg would be punished, and that was the end of the discussion. He walked away, leaving Meg standing in the cafeteria, terrified, holding an empty lunch tray, while other students stared at her with a mixture of pity and relief that they were not the ones Mike had targeted. What made this situation especially horrifying was that more food had actually spilled on Meg than on Mike. The accident had hurt Meg more than it hurt him, but that did not matter. Mike had decided Meg needed to be destroyed, and the amount of food or who was more affected was irrelevant. This was not about justice or fairness. It was about power and violence and a dangerous person deciding to hurt someone weaker. Principal Shepard's response to this situation revealed just how broken the school system was. When he learned about the upcoming fight, he did not call both students into his office. He did not contact their parents. He did not try to prevent the violence. Instead, he encouraged it. He made announcements over the school's public address system about the fight. He put up signs in the hallways advertising the event. The signs were explicit and cruel. The first sign read, "Meg versus Mental Mike," with the date and time, Friday after school. The second sign, put up right next to the first, read Meg's funeral with a date shortly after the fight. The principal of the school was publicly announcing that he expected a student to die, and he was treating this as entertainment rather than a crisis requiring intervention. Think about what this meant. The person responsible for student safety was advertising that a murder would take place on school property. Other teachers walked past these signs and said nothing. Other students saw them and accepted them as normal. The entire school system had agreed that Meg's death was inevitable and acceptable. No one was going to help her. No one was going to stop this. She was on her own. Meg desperately tried to find a way out of the fight. She went to her mother and asked to transfer to a different school. Lois refused. Lois made a joke about a Facebook page with likes, completely dismissing Meg's genuine fear for her life. Meg tried to get expelled, thinking that if she was no longer a student at James Woods Regional High School, she would not have to fight Mental Mike. She uploaded a sex tape of herself involving hot dogs onto the school computers, hoping this would be shocking enough to get her kicked out. It did not work. Meg tried to hire protection. She approached the 4 toughest guys at school and asked them to beat up Mental Mike for her. She offered them money. She offered them sexual favors, saying she would give them a swallow Friday, not understanding that this phrase had a sexual meaning and thinking it referred to the bird. The tough guys were interested in the money and the sexual offers, but when Meg clarified she meant the bird, they lost interest. Eventually, they agreed to fight Mike for $1,000. Meg somehow got the money and paid them. The 4 toughest students at James Woods Regional High School confronted Mental Mike. These were guys who had reputations for being strong, for winning fights, for being people you did not mess with. They surrounded Mike, confident they could handle one student no matter how crazy he was. Mental Mike destroyed all 4 of them simultaneously. He fought multiple opponents at once and won easily. The guys Meg had hired ended up in the hospital. Meg's friends, the girls who had sat with her at lunch and talked with her in the hallways, made their position clear. They told Meg directly that they had decided she should not talk to them anymore. One friend, Esther, explained they could be targeted by association if they remained friends with Meg. Another friend, Patty, said she did not want to get beaten up by a guy unless it was in a limousine after prom. This was presented as a joke, but the meaning was obvious. These girls valued their social standing more than Meg's life. The abandonment by her friends was devastating. Meg was completely alone. No one at school would help her. Her family would not help her. The administration would not stop the fight. She had no allies, no protection, no way out. Friday was coming, and when it arrived, Mental Mike was going to beat her to death in front of hundreds of witnesses who would cheer while it happened. In desperation, Meg went to the girls' bathroom to cry. While she was in there, she heard a voice coming from one of the stalls. It was Glenn Quagmire, the Griffin family's neighbor. Quagmire apparently used the girls' bathroom as his base of operations for reasons the show did not explain. He told Meg he had heard about her situation, and he offered to help her. Meg asked why Quagmire would help her. Quagmire revealed that he had been in her situation once. In 1986, during the Cola Wars, he had been bullied by a girl named Tracy Bellings. Quagmire had preferred RC Cola over Coke or Pepsi, and Tracy had tormented him for this choice. She had physically and sexually assaulted him repeatedly in the school cafeteria. Quagmire described this as a long, abusive relationship. He said he never faced his bully, and he did not want Meg to make the same mistake. Quagmire began training Meg. He explained that her weird body could be a dangerous weapon if used properly. He taught her to embrace her perceived grossness and turn it into a tool. This training montage was presented like similar scenes in martial arts movies, with Quagmire as the wise mentor teaching the student to tap into hidden power. But the power he was teaching Meg to access was not inner strength or fighting skill. It was her own physical repulsiveness. Friday arrived. The entire school gathered after classes to watch the fight. Hundreds of students formed a circle around Meg and Mental Mike. They were not there to help. They were not there to stop the violence. They were there to watch Meg get beaten to death, and they were excited about it. Students cheered. They took out their phones to record video. They treated this like a sporting event or a concert, something entertaining to witness and share on social media later. The fight began. Mental Mike attacked Meg immediately and without mercy. He punched her in the face, he threw her to the ground, he kicked her while she was down. He beat her continuously while she tried to defend herself. Meg could not fight back effectively. She had no combat training beyond Quagmire's strange advice. She was getting destroyed, and the crowd loved it. They cheered every time Mike landed a hit. They laughed when Meg fell. They were having fun watching a teenage girl get beaten nearly to death. Meg remembered what Quagmire had told her during training. He had said to use the gross. She understood what she had to do, even though it meant humiliating herself in front of the entire school. She grabbed her shirt and lifted it, exposing her breast to Mental Mike and everyone watching. The show did not depict this graphically, but the implication was clear. Mental Mike looked at Meg's exposed chest and his face began to melt. This was a direct reference to the 1981 film Raiders of the Lost Ark, where looking at the opened Ark of the Covenant caused people's faces to melt off. The show was saying that Meg's body was so repulsive, so horrifying, so fundamentally disgusting that seeing it caused the same effect as looking at the wrath of God. Mike's face melted completely and he collapsed. The crowd went silent for a moment, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Then they erupted in celebration. They cheered for Meg. They celebrated her victory. She had won the fight. She had survived. Students who had been mocking her minutes ago now treated her like a hero. Meg left the scene with Quagmire, and the narrator, who was supposed to be a future version of Meg telling the story, revealed that Meg died a year later, and everyone at school thought it was gross. That ending line was crucial. Even in her moment of victory, even after winning the fight and surviving Mental Mike, the show could not let Meg have a clean win. It had to add that when she died, people thought it was gross. Her death was not sad or tragic. It was disgusting. Even in death, Meg could not escape being the gross one, the repulsive one, the one everyone found offensive. The critical response to A Fistful of Meg was brutal. Eric Thurm of the AV Club gave the episode a grade of D and called the Meg abuse distasteful. He wrote that the jokes at Meg's expense were unfunny beyond typical Family Guy offensiveness. He said that while the Brian and Peter subplot in the episode had some amusing moments, the terrible Meg content made it impossible to appreciate anything else. The episode was one long exercise in cruelty toward a teenage girl, and it was not funny. What made this episode particularly damaging was that Meg's victory came from confirming everything terrible the show had said about her. For years, the show had called Meg ugly and gross and repulsive. Viewers could argue that those were just jokes, just exaggerations, just mean characters being mean. But in A Fistful of Meg, the show made it real. Meg's body was canonically so disgusting that looking at it caused physical destruction. The abuse was not exaggerated. The insults were not unfair. Meg really was that gross. This was different from Seahorse Seashell Party, where Meg accepted the abuse for the supposed good of the family. In that episode, Meg was a victim making a terrible choice, but she was still a victim. In A Fistful of Meg, the show suggested that maybe Meg was not a victim at all. Maybe she really was as bad as everyone said. Maybe the abuse was deserved because she genuinely was repulsive enough to melt faces. The episode also revealed something about how the show viewed Meg's few victories. When Meg finally won something, when she finally triumphed over someone who had hurt her, it could not be because she was strong or smart or brave. It had to be because she was gross. Her positive qualities, her resilience, her kindness, her talents, those could never be the source of her success. Only her perceived repulsiveness could give her power. Earlier in the episode, there was a flashback scene showing Peter in the hospital when Meg was born. He vandalized her birth certificate, changing her name from Megan to Megatron. This meant that legally, officially, on government documents, Meg's real name was Megatron Griffin. Peter had done this as a joke, referencing the Transformers villain, and he had never changed it back. Meg had gone through her entire childhood with a birth certificate that her father had defaced as a prank. Critics pointed out that the episode managed to catalog Meg abuse from birth to death. The birth certificate scene showed Peter mocking Meg from the moment she was born. The fight scene showed the entire school celebrating her suffering. And the narrator's final line confirmed that even her death would be treated as gross rather than sad. There was no escape for Meg, no point in her life where she would be free from cruelty. The show tried to frame Meg's victory as empowering. She had stood up to a bully. She had survived. She had found a way to win using what she had. But viewers who thought critically about what they were watching realized this was not empowerment. This was the show finding one more way to humiliate Meg. She did not defeat Mental Mike through courage. She defeated him by being so disgusting that he could not handle looking at her. That was not a victory. That was just another form of abuse. Some fans tried to defend the episode by pointing out that Meg at least won the fight, that at least this time she came out on top, but winning by being gross was worse than losing. If Meg had lost the fight but fought bravely, that would have shown character. If she had won through skill or cunning, that would have shown growth. Instead, she won by weaponizing the exact thing her abusers mocked her for. The show took the cruelest joke it had been making about Meg for years and made it the literal source of her power. The episode stood as proof that Family Guy had no interest in redeeming Meg, or giving her genuine victories, or treating her like a real character with value. The writers knew the abuse was extreme. They knew it made viewers uncomfortable. They had acknowledged it explicitly in Seahorse Seashell Party, and their response was not to stop the abuse or improve Meg's treatment. Their response was to double down, to make the abuse canonical, to confirm that yes, Meg really was as bad as everyone said. A Fistful of Meg represented the lowest point of the show's treatment of its teenage female character. It was mean-spirited, unfunny, and cruel in ways that went beyond comedy into something darker. It confirmed that the writers saw Meg as nothing more than a punching bag, someone who existed solely to be mocked and hurt and humiliated. Even when she won, she lost. Even in victory, she was the gross one, the disgusting one, the one everyone found offensive. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But perhaps the most disturbing part of all this abuse, all these years of cruelty, all these episodes dedicated to tormenting one character, was that it was not actually about Meg Griffin at all, because Meg was not a real person who had done anything to deserve this treatment. She was a character, a creation of writers, in a room, and those writers had a reason for hating Meg, a real-world explanation for why they spent over 2 decades systematically destroying this character. And when the truth about why Family Guy hated Meg finally came out, when Seth MacFarlane and the other writers explained their reasoning, throughout all the abuse, all the cruelty, all the years of mistreatment, one question haunted viewers who thought about Meg's situation too deeply. Why did Peter Griffin hate his daughter so much? Other bad fathers on television were neglectful or absent or incompetent, but Peter's hatred of Meg went beyond normal sitcom dysfunction. He actively wished for her death. He threw her into the ocean. He sold her to another family. His cruelty was not just excessive, it was specific and targeted in a way that suggested something deeper than ordinary bad parenting. The show provided a possible answer in Season 3, buried in a throwaway line that most viewers probably missed the first time they watched it. In the episode Screwed the Pooch, which aired on November 29, 2001, Brian Griffin was in court fighting for custody rights to his puppies. Peter, trying to help Brian's case, stood up and made a speech about what a good father Brian was compared to Peter himself. Peter said that if he were half the dad Brian was, he would know basic facts about his own children. He started listing things he did not know about Meg and Chris. Then he got to a particular piece of information and paused, as if he was not sure he should say it out loud in court. Peter said that if he were a good father, he would know that Meg's real father was, and before he could finish the sentence, Brian interrupted him and completed it. Brian said the name Stan Thompson. This was presented as a casual joke, a throwaway line in a larger scene about Brian's puppies, but the implication was staggering. According to what Brian said in open court, Meg Griffin's biological father was not Peter Griffin. It was some other man named Stan Thompson. Peter was raising a child who was not his, and apparently everyone in the family knew this except Meg herself. Meg did not hear this revelation. She was sitting in the courtroom during Brian's testimony, but she was wearing headphones and listening to music. The most important piece of information about her own parentage was spoken out loud just a few feet away from her, and she missed it completely. The show made sure that Meg remained ignorant while the audience, Peter and apparently Brian, all knew the truth about her father. The name Stan Thompson was never explained. The show did not provide any information about who this man was, how Lois met him, when Meg was conceived, or why Peter was raising another man's child. Stan Thompson was mentioned once in one line in one episode from Season 3, and then never directly referenced again in the official episodes. But that single line recontextualized everything about Peter's relationship with Meg. If Peter knew that Meg was not his biological daughter, it would explain the specific nature of his hatred. Peter was not just a bad father to all his children, he was significantly worse to Meg than to Chris or Stewie. He threw Meg into the ocean but never did anything similar to his sons. He constantly wished for Meg's death but never expressed similar feelings about Chris or Stewie. He sold Meg to another family but kept his sons. The difference in treatment was dramatic and consistent. The Stan Thompson theory suggested that Peter saw Meg as a living reminder of Lois's infidelity or mistake. Every time he looked at Meg, he saw evidence that Lois had been with another man. Every time Meg called him dad, it reminded him that he was raising a child who was not his. His cruelty toward Meg was not about Meg herself. It was about what she represented. She was the physical embodiment of something that hurt Peter, and he took that hurt out on her every single day. The show dropped other hints throughout the years that supported this theory. In the season 4 episode Petarded, there was a suggestion that Meg's real father had abandoned her. The exact context was unclear, but the implication was that Peter was not Meg's biological father, and that whoever was had left before Meg was old enough to remember him. This lined up with the Stan Thompson revelation from season 3. There were also numerous jokes and references to Meg's birth that suggested something was wrong from the beginning. In the season 1 episode I Never Met the Dead Man, Peter was disappointed when Meg was born female and asked the doctor to check again. This could be read as just Peter wanting a son, but in light of the Stan Thompson information, it took on a darker meaning. Maybe Peter was hoping the baby would not be his at all, and when the doctor confirmed she was a girl, it proved Lois had been with someone else. The season 11 episode Ratings Guy included a flashback that showed Peter and Lois taking baby Meg to a fire station. This was not a tour or a visit for fire safety education. Peter and Lois put baby Meg down on the steps of the fire station and tried to run away. They attempted to abandon their infant daughter like she was an unwanted package. The firefighters presumably stopped them or they changed their minds, but the intent was clear. They had tried to get rid of Meg when she was just a baby. If Peter knew Meg was not his biological child, this abandonment attempt made more sense. He was not trying to abandon his own daughter. He was trying to get rid of another man's child that he had been stuck raising. Lois, who would have known the truth about Meg's parentage, went along with the abandonment attempt. Neither parent wanted this baby, possibly because she represented Lois's infidelity. There was also the matter of Meg's middle name. In the episode A Fistful of Meg, it was revealed that Meg's full legal name was Megatron Semenstein Griffin. Peter had vandalized her birth certificate to change her first name from Megan to Megatron as a joke, but the middle name Semenstein was chosen deliberately by both parents. When spoken aloud, Semenstein sounds like Siemensstein. According to information from the show, Peter and Lois specifically chose this middle name because that was what they wished Meg had been. They wished the sperm that created Meg had never fertilized Lois's egg. They wished Meg had just been a semen stain on the inside of a condom instead of a living child. This was an astonishingly cruel thing to do to any baby, but it was especially cruel if the baby was the result of an affair or a drunken mistake that neither parent wanted to remember. The Stan Thompson theory also explained why no one in the family seemed to question or challenge Peter's abuse of Meg. Lois knew Meg was not Peter's biological child, so maybe she felt guilty about forcing Peter to raise another man's daughter. Maybe she felt she could not demand better treatment for Meg because she was the one who had created this situation in the first place. Brian knew about Stan Thompson. He was the one who said the name in court, so he knew Peter was raising a child that was not his. Maybe that was why Brian, despite being the voice of reason, rarely intervened when Peter abused Meg. The theory painted a picture of how Meg was conceived. At some point early in Peter and Lois's relationship, possibly right after they got married, Lois went out for a girls' night. She had too much to drink. She met Stan Thompson at a bar or club. They had sex. Stan used a condom, but it broke. Lois got pregnant and initially thought the baby was Peter's. By the time she discovered the truth, either because Stan contacted her or because the timeline did not add up, she was already months into the pregnancy. Lois and Peter had to decide what to do. Abortion was apparently not an option Lois would consider, or it was too late by the time they knew. Stan Thompson, the biological father, refused to take responsibility and disappeared. Lois was left pregnant with another man's child, and Peter agreed to raise Meg as his own. But he never forgave Lois for the infidelity, and he never accepted Meg as his daughter. From birth, Meg was the unwanted reminder of the worst moment in Peter and Lois's marriage. This backstory explained so much about the family dynamics. It explained why Peter's abuse was so extreme and so specific to Meg. It explained why Lois, despite being capable of standing up to Peter in other situations, rarely defended Meg from his cruelty. It explained why the family had tried to abandon Meg as a baby. It explained the cruel middle name. It explained everything. But here was the problem with the Stan Thompson theory. It was never confirmed or developed in any meaningful way in the actual show. Stan Thompson was mentioned once, in one line, in one episode. He never appeared as a character. He was never contacted or confronted. The show never did a storyline where Meg discovered the truth about her parentage or went searching for her biological father. Stan Thompson existed as a name, a possibility, a theory, but not as a real element of the show's canon. Some fans created elaborate stories about Stan Thompson. They imagined what he looked like, what his personality was like, why he had abandoned Lois. They wrote fan fiction where Meg discovered the truth and tracked down her real father. They created entire storylines that the show itself never bothered to explore. The Fanon version of Stan Thompson became more developed than anything that actually appeared in Family Guy. The show seemed to enjoy hinting at deeper explanations for Peter's behavior without ever committing to them. The Stan Thompson line was perfect for this. It suggested there might be a reason for the abuse, it gave fans something to theorize about, but it never actually explained or justified anything. Peter was still abusing a child he had raised since birth. Even if Meg was not biologically his, he had chosen to raise her, which made him her father in every way that mattered. Biology did not excuse his treatment of her. What the Stan Thompson theory really did was give some viewers a way to make sense of something that otherwise made no sense. People wanted to understand why Peter hated Meg so much. They wanted there to be a reason, an explanation, something that would make the abuse feel less random and cruel. The theory that Meg was another man's child gave them that explanation. It was not a good explanation, and it did not justify anything, but it was something. The show also had multiple other retcons and jokes about Meg's birth that contradicted each other. In one episode, Meg was born with her heart on top of her head, which was why she always wore a hat. In another episode, there was a different explanation for her appearance. The show constantly changed Meg's origin story, treating her birth as just another opportunity for jokes, rather than as something with consistent internal logic. This inconsistency meant that the Stan Thompson theory could not be taken too seriously. If the show did not care about keeping Meg's backstory consistent from episode to episode, then any single piece of information about her parentage was probably just a throwaway joke rather than meaningful canon. The writers were not building a complex story about Meg's secret parentage. They were just making whatever jokes they thought were funny in the moment. But the Stan Thompson line persisted in fan discussions because it was the only explanation the show ever offered for why Peter treated Meg so differently from his other children. Fans latched onto it because the alternative was accepting that Peter just hated his daughter for no reason, that he abused her purely because the writers thought it was funny, that there was no deeper explanation at all. The theory also raised uncomfortable questions about Lois. If she had cheated on Peter early in their marriage, if she had gotten pregnant by another man, if she had lied about Meg's paternity for years, what did that say about her? Lois was already shown to be a flawed character who had done drugs, stolen things, and appeared in pornography. But lying about a child's father was a different level of deception. It would mean that every day of Meg's life was built on a lie that Lois maintained. And if Lois knew that Peter was abusing Meg partly because of resentment over her infidelity, her failure to protect Meg became even worse. She could have taken Meg and left Peter. She could have told Meg the truth and given her the option to know her real father. She could have demanded that Peter treat Meg better or face consequences. But Lois did none of those things. She let Peter abuse Meg and did almost nothing to stop it, possibly, because she felt guilty about the situation she had created. The Stan Thompson theory turned the Griffin family dysfunction into something even darker. It was not just a story about a father who inexplicably hated his daughter. It became a story about infidelity, lies, resentment, and a child paying the price for her parents' mistakes. Meg was not just unlucky. She was the victim of choices Lois and Peter made before she was even born. But ultimately, whether Peter was Meg's biological father or not did not matter. He raised her. He was the only father she had ever known. He had legal and moral responsibility for her, and he chose to abuse her anyway. The Stan Thompson theory might explain Peter's feelings, but it did not excuse his actions. You do not get to torment a child for 17 years because you resent how they were conceived. The real tragedy of the Stan Thompson theory was that it highlighted how little the show cared about Meg as a character. The writers dropped a bombshell revelation about her parentage, and then never did anything with it. They could have explored Meg's feelings about being the product of an affair. They could have had her search for her biological father. They could have examined how learning the truth affected her relationship with Peter and Lois. But they did none of those things. The Stan Thompson line was just another joke, another way to hurt Meg, another detail in a pile of cruelty that the show never bothered to organize into a coherent story. What fans really wanted was not proof that Stan Thompson was Meg's father. They wanted proof that there was a reason for all the abuse. They wanted to believe that somewhere underneath all the cruelty, there was a story with internal logic, with cause and effect, with meaning. The Stan Thompson theory offered that hope. It suggested that maybe the writers had a plan, maybe there was a purpose, maybe it all meant something. Before we move on, and make sure to subscribe make sure you're enjoying this breakdown. But the truth was simpler and more disappointing than any theory. The writers did not have a master plan for Meg's character. They were not building towards some revelation or redemption. The abuse was not carefully crafted setup for a meaningful payoff. The writers just did not like Meg, did not know what to do with her, and found it easier to make her the butt of jokes than to develop her as a real character. And when Seth MacFarlane and the writing team finally admitted why they treated Meg the way they did, when they revealed their real-world reasoning for over 2 decades of systematic abuse, it confirmed what many viewers had suspected all along. The cruelty was not about the character, it was about the writers themselves. Throughout all the abuse, all the mockery, all the years of being told she was worthless, Meg Griffin possessed something her family never acknowledged: genuine talent. Not just in one area, but in multiple areas. Meg was athletically gifted, musically talented, linguistically skilled, and consistently demonstrated more emotional intelligence than anyone else in her family. But none of it mattered. The Griffin family had decided Meg was the failure, the disappointment, the worthless one. And once they made that decision, no amount of actual achievement could change their minds. This was perhaps the cruelest aspect of Meg's treatment. If she genuinely had been talentless, if she really had been boring and incompetent and unable to do anything well, the family's dismissal of her might have made some twisted sense. But Meg was not incompetent. She was remarkably capable in ways that should have made her parents proud. The family's refusal to acknowledge her abilities proved that the abuse was never about Meg's actual qualities. It was about their need for a scapegoat, someone to blame and mock and treat as lesser. The show revealed Meg's hidden talents, gradually, usually in passing, or as background information that was immediately dismissed or overshadowed. In multiple episodes, it was established that Meg could do bird calls. This was not a common skill. Most people cannot accurately replicate bird sounds in ways that might fool actual birds. It requires careful listening, good auditory memory, and control over your voice. Meg had developed this ability on her own, presumably spending time alone listening to birds and practicing until she got it right. The family never asked about this skill. They never encouraged her to develop it further. They just knew she could do it and they did not care. Meg played the saxophone. This was shown several times throughout the series. Learning a musical instrument requires dedication, practice, and patience. Saxophones are particularly challenging because they require breath control, finger coordination, and understanding of music theory. Meg had put in the hours necessary to become proficient at her instrument. She could play songs, she could read music, she was genuinely skilled, but the family never attended her performances. They never asked her to play for them. They never showed any interest in this accomplishment. Perhaps most impressively, Meg spoke multiple foreign languages. The show never specified exactly which languages she knew, but it was established as canon that she could communicate in several languages beyond English. Learning one foreign language is difficult. Learning multiple languages requires significant intellectual capability and years of study. Meg had somehow found the time and motivation to become multilingual while also dealing with constant abuse at home and bullying at school. This was an extraordinary achievement that opened up entire worlds of literature, culture, and human connection that monolingual people could never access. The family never acknowledged it. Meg could also sing in foreign languages. This was a separate skill from just speaking them. Singing requires matching pitch, maintaining rhythm, and controlling your voice in ways that normal speech does not. Doing this in a language that is not your native tongue adds another layer of difficulty. You have to understand the pronunciation, the meaning, the emotional content of the lyrics, all while hitting the correct notes. Meg had mastered this, and her family never asked her to perform. They never expressed pride. They never even seemed to notice she could do this remarkable thing. Athletically, Meg was far more capable than anyone in her family gave her credit for. She was skilled at bowling, a sport that requires precision, consistency, and understanding of angles and physics. She played field hockey, a fast-paced team sport that demands cardiovascular fitness, hand-eye coordination, and strategic thinking. She played basketball, which requires agility, teamwork, and quick decision-making. She competed in roller derby, one of the most physically demanding sports that exists, requiring skating skill, physical toughness, and the ability to take hits and keep going. The show even suggested that Meg had Olympic-level potential in some sports. This was mentioned casually as if it was not a big deal, as if having a child with Olympic potential was something every family experienced. In reality, achieving Olympic-level skill in any sport requires extraordinary dedication, natural talent, and years of focused training. Meg had somehow developed this level of ability despite receiving no support from her family, despite having no encouragement, despite being constantly told she was worthless. When Meg made it to the roller derby championship, a moment that should have been a highlight of her young life, her achievement was immediately overshadowed. The family attended the event, but they did not go to support Meg. They went because they had nothing else to do. When Meg tried to share her excitement about making the championship, Lois announced something about her own life that took all the attention away from Meg's accomplishment. The moment that should have been about Meg celebrating her success became about Lois, and Meg was once again pushed to the side. This pattern repeated throughout the series. Whenever Meg achieved something, whenever she demonstrated a skill or reached a milestone or did something impressive, the family found a way to ignore it, dismiss it, or actively undermine it. They could not allow Meg to have a victory because Meg's role in the family was to be the failure. If they acknowledged she was actually talented and capable, it would disrupt the entire family dynamic. The family was consistently surprised when they discovered Meg could do things. This surprise revealed how little attention they paid to her. Parents are usually aware of their children's interests and abilities. They know what sports their kids play, what instruments they study, what languages they take in school. But Peter and Lois were apparently so disinterested in Meg that they could watch her demonstrate a skill and be genuinely shocked that she possessed it. They had spent 17 years living with this person and had never bothered to learn basic facts about her capabilities. Meg was also frequently the voice of reason in the family. When Brian was not available to play that role, or when Brian was being too pretentious or self-absorbed, Meg would step in and point out the obvious flaws in whatever insane plan the family was pursuing. She recognized when things were dangerous or stupid or morally wrong. She tried to warn her family. She tried to inject some sanity into their chaos. They ignored her every time. Being the voice of reason was actually a significant role. Someone needed to ground the family in reality, to point out when they were about to do something that would hurt themselves or others. Meg performed this function regularly. She did emotional labor for the family, trying to keep them from destroying themselves, and she received no credit or appreciation for it. The family treated her warnings and reasonable objections as annoying obstacles rather than as valuable input from someone who cared about them. Meg also demonstrated emotional intelligence and empathy that no one else in the family possessed. She understood how other people felt. She recognized when she had hurt someone and felt genuine remorse. She tried to repair relationships when they were damaged. She cared about people beyond how they could benefit her. These were mature, valuable traits that made Meg a good person and a good friend to the few people who bothered to know her. But the family saw these qualities as weaknesses rather than strengths. The contrast between Meg's actual abilities and how the family treated her created a disturbing picture. This was not a family accurately assessing a child's limitations and being disappointed. This was a family deliberately ignoring a talented child's achievements because acknowledging those achievements would interfere with their need to have someone to mock. They had invested years into the narrative that Meg was the worthless one. Admitting she was actually capable would mean admitting they had been wrong, that they had been cruel for no reason, that they had wasted their daughter's potential. So they maintained the fiction. They pretended Meg had nothing to offer. They acted surprised when confronted with evidence of her abilities. They changed the subject when she tried to share her accomplishments. They created an alternative reality where Meg was exactly what they said she was: boring, incompetent, worthless, and they forced everyone, including Meg herself, to live in that false reality. This systematic denial of Meg's talents did tremendous psychological damage. Imagine working hard to develop skills, achieving genuine success, demonstrating real capability, and having everyone you love tell you that none of it matters, that you are still worthless, that your achievements mean nothing. Over time, you would stop trying. You would stop believing in yourself. You would internalize the message that no matter what you do, you will always be the failure. Meg experienced this for 17 years. She kept trying anyway. She kept developing skills, competing in sports, learning languages, playing music. She kept hoping that maybe this achievement would be the one that made her family proud. Maybe if she got good enough at something, they would finally see her value. But it never worked. The family never saw her value because they did not want to see it. Seeing it would complicate their simple narrative. The show occasionally acknowledged that Meg was more capable than the rest of the family gave her credit for. In some episodes, other characters who were not part of the Griffin family would recognize Meg's abilities and treat her with respect. But these moments were always temporary. The outside perspective would validate Meg briefly, and then the show would return to the Griffin household where everyone agreed Meg was worthless, and that outside validation would be forgotten. What made this particularly tragic was that Meg's talent suggested she had a bright future ahead of her if she could just survive her childhood. Someone who spoke multiple languages, played musical instruments, excelled at multiple sports, and possessed emotional intelligence was someone who could succeed in many different careers. Meg had options. She had potential. She could have gone to a good college, built a successful career, created a life far away from Quahog where people appreciated her abilities. But the constant abuse was eroding her sense of self-worth to the point where she might never pursue those opportunities. If you spend your entire childhood being told you are worthless, if your own parents cannot find anything good to say about you, if your achievements are constantly dismissed, eventually you believe the message. You stop trying because trying leads nowhere. You accept that you are what they say you are. Meg was in danger of losing her potential before she ever got a chance to use it. The family's treatment of Meg's talents also revealed something about American attitudes toward women and girls. Meg's abilities were dismissed partly because she was female. If Chris had demonstrated Olympic-level athletic ability, Peter would have been proud. If Stewie showed musical talent, the family would celebrate. But Meg's achievements were treated as irrelevant because girls' accomplishments often are treated as less important than boys' accomplishments. The show was reflecting real sexism, whether intentionally or not. Additionally, many of Meg's talents were in areas traditionally associated with women: languages, music, emotional intelligence. These skills are often undervalued compared to things like physical strength or business success. The show's dismissal of Meg's abilities was part of a broader cultural pattern of devaluing work and skills associated with femininity. Meg could speak multiple languages, but that was not impressive. She could mediate family conflicts, but that was not valuable. She could excel at team sports, but that was not worth celebrating. The family also used Meg's talents against her when it was convenient. If they needed someone to translate something, they would ask Meg to use her language skills. If they needed someone to do emotional labor or smooth over a conflict, they would expect Meg to handle it. They would exploit her abilities when it benefited them, but they would never acknowledge or appreciate those same abilities. Meg was useful to them, but she was not valued by them. This exploitation added another layer to the abuse. Meg was not just ignored, she was used. The family took advantage of her skills without giving her credit. They benefited from her talents while simultaneously telling her she had nothing to offer. They wanted her to serve them with her abilities, but never wanted to admit she was capable. It was a complete denial of her humanity. Some viewers noticed this aspect of Meg's character and wondered why the show included it. If Meg was supposed to be the worthless one, why give her all these talents? Why not just make her genuinely incompetent at everything? The answer was that making Meg talented made the abuse more cruel and therefore, in the writers' minds, more funny. It was not enough to have a character who failed at everything. The comedy came from having a character who succeeded at things and still got treated like garbage. The joke was that Meg's accomplishments meant nothing, but this revealed something deeply disturbing about the show's values. Family Guy was saying that some people do not deserve recognition no matter what they achieve. It was saying that social status and family hierarchy mattered more than actual ability or achievement. It was saying that if everyone agrees to treat someone as worthless, that person becomes worthless regardless of objective reality. These were dark, cynical messages dressed up as comedy. Meg's hidden talents also made the viewer complicit in her abuse in an uncomfortable way. The audience knew Meg was capable. They had seen evidence of her skills. But they continued watching episodes where she was mocked and degraded, and many viewers continued laughing at those jokes. The show was testing how much cruelty audiences would accept towards someone they knew did not deserve it. And for many years, audiences accepted a lot. The talents also made clear that the abuse was not about Meg. It was about the abusers. Peter did not hate Meg because she was actually worthless. He hated her because he needed someone to hate. Lois did not neglect Meg because Meg had nothing to offer. She neglected her because it was easier than confronting the dysfunction in her marriage and family. The siblings mocked Meg not because she was actually mockable, but because they had learned that was what you did to the designated family scapegoat. Meg's actual qualities were irrelevant to how she was treated. This dynamic exists in real families. Sometimes a family chooses one member to be the scapegoat, the one who gets blamed for everything, the one who cannot do anything right no matter how hard they try. Once that role is assigned, evidence that contradicts the narrative gets ignored or reinterpreted. The scapegoat's achievements are minimized. Their failures are magnified. The family needs them to be the bad one, so they become the bad one in everyone's eyes regardless of reality. Family Guy took this real psychological dynamic and amplified it to extremes. The show demonstrated what happens when a talented, capable person gets trapped in the scapegoat role. They can achieve remarkable things and still be treated as worthless. They can develop impressive skills and still be dismissed. They can be objectively more accomplish than anyone else in their family and still be called the failure. The abuse becomes untethered from reality and becomes its own self-sustaining system. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But as disturbing as it was to watch Meg's talents be systematically ignored and dismissed for over 20 years of television, there was something even more disturbing waiting to be revealed. Because eventually, Seth MacFarlane and the Family Guy writers explained why they treated Meg this way. They admitted the real-world reason behind decades of abuse. And their explanation made everything worse because it confirmed that the cruelty was not accidental, not a creative choice, not part of some larger plan. It was simply the result of a group of male writers who did not know how to write teenage girls and found it therapeutic to torture one. For over 20 years, viewers wondered why Family Guy treated Meg Griffin with such relentless cruelty. Fans developed theories. They analyzed episodes looking for clues. They debated whether the abuse was intentional commentary on family dynamics or just lazy comedy. Some believe there must be a deeper meaning, a purpose behind the systematic degradation of this one character. They wanted to believe that somewhere in the writer's room, someone had a plan, that all the abuse was building towards something meaningful. In 2025, Seth MacFarlane finally provided an answer. In an interview, he explained why the writers had treated Meg the way they did for more than 2 decades. His explanation was simple, direct, and made everything worse. There was no master plan. There was no deeper meaning. There was no creative vision being fulfilled. The writers abused Meg because they did not know what else to do with her. They were a predominantly male writing room trying to write a teenage girl, and they could not figure it out. So instead of hiring people who could write teenage girls, instead of developing Meg as a real character, they made her the punching bag. And MacFarlane admitted they found it therapeutic. Let that sink in for a moment. A group of adult male comedy writers found it therapeutic to spend years writing brutal abuse of a fictional teenage girl. They enjoyed it. It made them feel better. Creating scenarios where a young woman was mocked, degraded, physically assaulted, and systematically destroyed brought them relief and satisfaction. They put their therapeutic needs ahead of creating good television, ahead of treating their character with basic dignity, ahead of considering what message they were sending to millions of viewers. MacFarlane explained that the writing room was predominantly male during the years when Meg's abuse intensified. The writers had trouble relating to Meg because she was a teenage girl, and they were not. They struggled with teen girl drama storylines. They did not know how to make her interesting or funny in ways that felt authentic. This was presented as if it explained or justified the abuse, as if not being able to write a character was a valid reason to torture that character for entertainment. The response from fans and critics was immediate and harsh. Social media exploded with people pointing out the obvious solution to having trouble writing teenage girls. Hire women to write the character. Hire female writers who understood teenage girl experiences. Hire people who could relate to Meg. The writing room did not have to be entirely male. Television writing rooms had been including women for decades. Family Guy could have done the same thing at any point during its run. One commenter wrote simply, "Maybe hire a few female writers?" This was not a radical suggestion. This was basic common sense. If you are struggling to write a character because you cannot relate to their demographic, you bring in writers who can relate. You do not spend 20 years abusing that character because you are too lazy or too stubborn to hire appropriate writers. Another social media user wrote that they personally never found the mistreatment of a teenage girl funny. They pointed out that out of all the ways the writing team could have punched in their comedy, they consistently punched down at girls. This was a crucial observation. Comedy can punch up at powerful people and institutions, or it can punch down at vulnerable people. Family Guy chose to punch down at a teenage girl for over 20 years. That was a choice, not an accident. Other critics noted that Seth MacFarlane and the writing team had a lot to answer for regarding how they portrayed the teenage girl character. The abuse was not harmless. It was not meaningless. It reflected real attitudes about women and girls, attitudes that devalued them and treated them as acceptable targets for cruelty. By making Meg suffering the longest-running gag on the show, Family Guy was normalizing violence and abuse toward young women. The admission that the abuse was therapeutic for the writers cast all of Meg's worst moments in a new, disturbing light. Every time Peter farted in Meg's face, every time the family mocked her appearance, every time she was physically assaulted or emotionally destroyed. Those scenes were not just comedy. They were male writers working out their frustrations on a fictional teenage girl. They were using Meg as an outlet for whatever negative feelings they had about women, about teenage girls, about people they could not understand or relate to. This explained why the abuse was so specific and so sustained. It was not that the writers occasionally made Meg the butt of a joke. It was that they consistently, deliberately, systematically made Meg suffer in ways that went beyond normal sitcom cruelty. They gave her the worst dating experiences. They made her the victim of violence. They had her own family wish for her death. They created entire episodes dedicated to her humiliation. This level of focus required intention and effort. The writers were actively choosing to hurt this character, and they were doing it because it felt good. The therapeutic aspect was particularly disturbing because therapy is supposed to help you process feelings in healthy ways. It is supposed to give you tools to deal with difficult emotions without hurting others. But the Family Guy writers were using cruelty toward a fictional character as therapy, and that suggested they had not actually processed whatever feelings made them unable to write teenage girls. They had just found a socially acceptable outlet for those feelings, putting them in a cartoon where millions of people would watch and laugh. The explanation also revealed that the writers knew the abuse was extreme. McFarlane did not claim they were writing normal sitcom comedy that some overly sensitive viewers misinterpreted. He acknowledged they were abusing the character. He knew it was wrong on some level. But instead of stopping or changing course, the writers continued for over 20 years. They knew they were doing something problematic, and they did it anyway because it served their emotional needs. By season 22, something finally changed. According to reports from fans and observers of the show, the abuse ceased completely around this time. The change coincided with two significant factors: increased backlash against the Meg abuse from fans and critics, and more women joining the writing staff. Once women were in the writer's room, once people who could actually relate to teenage girl experiences had input on the scripts, Meg's treatment improved dramatically. This proved several things. First, it proved that the abuse was never necessary for the show to function. Family Guy could be funny without torturing Meg. The show did not need a punching bag to work. Second, it proved that representation in the writer's room mattered enormously. Having women writers changed how the show treated its female characters. Third, it proved that the male writers had been choosing to abuse Meg all along. It was not that they could not write her any other way. They had not wanted to write her any other way. The fact that it took until season 22 for this change to happen was damning. Family Guy premiered in 1999. By 2020, when season 22 would have been in production, the show had been on the air for over 20 years. For 2 decades, the show had employed predominantly male writers who found it therapeutic to abuse a teenage girl character, and no one with authority to change it had intervened. Fox, the network that aired the show, had allowed this to continue. Seth MacFarlane, the creator who had final say over the show's content, had allowed it. The producers, the executives, everyone with power had watched Meg get abused for 20 years and decided it was fine. The cultural impact of the Meg abuse extended beyond the show itself. The catchphrase, "Shut up, Meg," became one of the most recognizable lines from Family Guy. It appeared on merchandise, on social media, in everyday conversation. Mila Kunis, the actress who voiced Meg, reported that strangers would say, "Shut up, Meg," to her in real life. People who met her, who knew she was a successful actress with a career far beyond Family Guy, still felt entitled to quote that dismissive, cruel line at her. The abuse had jumped from fiction to reality. This catchphrase entering popular culture meant that millions of people were casually using a line designed to silence and dismiss a teenage girl. They were repeating abuse as if it were clever or funny. Young girls watching the show learned that this was acceptable behavior, that telling women and girls to shut up was comedy. Young boys learned that mocking and dismissing girls was something to laugh about. The show had created a cultural artifact that normalized cruelty toward women and girls. The critical reception of Meg's treatment accumulated over years. Individual critics had been pointing out problems with specific episodes since the early seasons. But as the abuse intensified and as cultural awareness of sexism in media increased, the criticism became more pointed and more frequent. Kevin McFarland of the AV Club, who reviewed many Family Guy episodes, repeatedly called out the show for taking the path of least resistance with Meg instead of developing her as a valuable character. His review of Seahorse Seashell Party was particularly scathing. He wrote that instead of working to make Meg appreciated or comically valuable, Family Guy had simply joined the fan chorus of hatred. One episode trying to justify that shift changed nothing. This was a critic directly stating that the show had failed in its most basic responsibility, creating characters that audiences could care about. The writers had given up on Meg and decided abuse was easier than actual character development. Eric Thurm, another critic, called the Meg abuse in A Fistful of Meg distasteful and unfunny beyond typical Family Guy offensiveness. This was significant because Family Guy had built its reputation on offensive humor. Critics and audiences expected the show to push boundaries and make controversial jokes. But even within that context, even accounting for the show's established tone, the Meg abuse crossed a line. It was not edgy or boundary pushing. It was just mean. Multiple episodes featuring Meg were named among the worst in television history. Not just the worst Family Guy episodes, but among the worst episodes of any show. Seahorse Seashell Party appeared on these lists regularly. A fistful of Meg was frequently mentioned. Better Off Meg earned particular hatred from fans who felt it represented the show at its most cruel and pointless. These episodes were not just bad television, they were considered damaging, harmful content that made viewers uncomfortable in ways that went beyond entertainment. The consensus among critics was that Family Guy had created a problem it never figured out how to solve. The show had established Meg as the family punching bag early in its run. Once that dynamic was set, once audiences expected Meg to be mocked and abused, the writers felt trapped. They thought they had to continue the abuse or risk disappointing viewers who found it funny, but they also faced increasing criticism from viewers who found it disturbing. The show was stuck in a pattern of its own creation. Some critics argued that if the writers had genuinely wanted to do something meaningful with Meg's character, they had multiple opportunities. They could have done a storyline where Meg permanently left the family and built a better life elsewhere. They could have had the family realize their abuse was wrong and work to change. They could have shown Meg developing self-esteem and refusing to accept mistreatment. Any of these directions would have been more interesting than just continuing the same abuse pattern for 20+ years. But the writers never took those opportunities. They occasionally gestured toward change, like in Dial Meg for Murder, when Meg briefly became powerful and violent, or in Seahorse Seashell Party, when she confronted the family. But these episodes always ended with everything returning to the status quo. Meg went back to being abused. The family went back to being terrible. Nothing changed because the writers did not want anything to change. The abuse was the point. The backlash against the Meg abuse grew over time as audiences became more aware of how media representation affected real people. Viewers started asking questions about what it meant to have a show that millions of people watched portray the systematic abuse of a teenage girl as comedy for over 20 years. They questioned what messages this sent to young viewers, both girls who might identify with Meg and boys who might learn that treating girls this way was acceptable. Petitions were created demanding that the show stop the Meg abuse. One petition called the treatment of Meg a heinous hate crime and argued that the writers were getting away with it because it was a cartoon. The petition author pointed out that the feelings underlying the abuse were real, even if Meg was fictional. The hate that drove the jokes reflected actual attitudes toward women and girls. The petition did not gain enough signatures to force any change, but it showed that some viewers were deeply uncomfortable with what they were watching. Family Guy responded to this backlash in season 22 by reducing and eventually eliminating most of the extreme abuse. Meg was treated more like a normal family member. She was not perfect and she still faced some mockery, but the systematic physical and emotional torture largely stopped. This change proved that the show could function without abusing Meg. Ratings did not collapse. Viewers did not abandon the show in say, mass. The predicted disaster of treating Meg like a human being never materialized, but the damage was already done. For over 20 years, Family Guy had broadcast abuse of a teenage girl character to millions of viewers. An entire generation had grown up watching Meg get tortured and learning that this was acceptable comedy. The show had normalized cruelty toward young women and made dismissing girls' experiences into a cultural catchphrase. Stopping the abuse in season 22 did not erase 2 decades of harmful content that would continue to exist in syndication and on streaming services forever. The writers' admission that they found abusing Meg therapeutic also raised questions about the psychological state of the people creating popular entertainment. These were successful, wealthy men who were living their dreams, working in television, making people laugh, achieving fame and fortune, and they needed to torture a fictional teenage girl to feel better. What did that say about them? What unresolved issues or unhealthy attitudes toward women were they carrying that required this outlet? Seth MacFarlane himself has done other work that treats women with more respect. His shows American Dad and The Cleveland Show, while still crude and offensive in typical MacFarlane fashion, did not feature the same level of systematic abuse toward female characters. This suggested he was capable of creating content without using female suffering as therapy. But for some reason, with Family Guy specifically, with Meg specifically, he and his writers chose cruelty. They chose to make the abuse the defining characteristic of this one character. The explanation that the writers could not relate to teenage girls was also suspicious because Family Guy featured many characters the writers presumably could not relate to. Peter Griffin was an overweight, alcoholic, Irish Catholic father of 3. Most of the writers were not that either. Stewie was a British-accented baby genius who wanted to kill his mother. None of the writers were that. Brian was a talking dog. None of the writers were dogs. The show regularly wrote characters whose experiences were nothing like the writers' experiences. But only with Meg, only with the teenage girl, did they claim inability to relate justified, systematic abuse. The real explanation was simpler and uglier than not being able to relate. The writers did not value teenage girls as characters worth developing. They did not see Meg as deserving of the same effort they put into Peter or Stewie or Brian. They did not care about making her interesting or funny or sympathetic. She was a girl, she was young, she was not the demographic they cared about or understood, so she became the punching bag. It was laziness justified as inability and cruelty justified as therapy. Looking back at Family Guy's treatment of Meg Griffin across 22 seasons, what emerged was a story about entertainment industry sexism, lazy writing, and the normalization of abuse. The show created a character, decided she was worthless, and spent 2 decades proving her worthlessness through systematic cruelty. They did this because a room full of male writers could not be bothered to write her properly and found it emotionally satisfying to hurt her. And millions of people watched and laughed while a fictional teenage girl suffered, because the show told them it was funny and they believed it. The writers finally stopped the abuse in season 22 when women joined the staff and forced the change. But those women should never have been necessary. Basic human decency should have stopped the abuse years earlier. Seth MacFarlane should have stopped it. The network should have stopped it. The producers should have stopped it. Instead, everyone with power chose to let it continue because the ratings were good and the money kept coming in, and who cares if we are teaching millions of viewers that abusing teenage girls is hilarious? So yes, family. Guy hated Meg Griffin, but Meg was never real. She could not be hated because she did not exist. What really happened was that the writers hated the idea of teenage girls, or at least hated having to write them. They hated that they could not figure her out easily. They hated that she required effort and empathy and actual character development, so they took their frustration out on a fictional character, called it comedy, and broadcast it to the world for over 20 years. And when someone finally asked them why, they admitted it was because they found the cruelty therapeutic. That admission did not explain or justify anything. It just confirmed what many viewers had suspected all along. The abuse was never about Meg. It was always about the people who created her and then decided she deserved to suffer. So did Family Guy really hate Meg Griffin? Looking at the evidence across 22 seasons, the answer is complicated. Family Guy could not hate Meg because Meg was not real. But the writers who created her absolutely hated what she represented, a character they could not figure out how to write, a teenage girl in a room full of men who found it easier to torture her than to develop her as a real person. We watched Meg's abuse evolve from dismissal to destruction. In the early seasons, she was just boring, forgettable, the normal girl in a family of chaos. Then season 4 shifted the abuse to her appearance, calling her ugly and opening the door to physical cruelty. Peter took that opportunity and ran with it, farting in her face, throwing her overboard, using her for rodeo practice, and openly wishing for her death. The whole family joined in. Lois, Chris, and Stewie all contributed to making Meg's existence miserable. School offered no escape. Connie and the popular girls bullied her relentlessly. Principal Shepard literally advertised her death. Mental Mike beat her nearly to death while the student body cheered. Even her friends abandoned her. The moment associating with Meg became inconvenient. The entire universe of Quahog agreed that Meg deserved suffering. Desperate for any affection, Meg fell into terrible relationships with people who used her, manipulated her, or betrayed her. She dated much older men, was used as a prank by Jimmy Fallon, became obsessed with Brian after he showed her basic kindness, and went to prison for harboring a convict. Every relationship confirmed what her family told her. She was unlovable. When Meg finally snapped and fought back in Dial Meg for Murder, when she became violent and dangerous, the show revealed what years of abuse creates. Then came Seahorse Seashell Party, where Meg spoke the truth about her family's cruelty, only to take it all back and accept her role as the family's lightning rod because they needed someone to abuse. The show presented this as noble rather than tragic. A fistful of Meg made everything worse by having Meg win a fight, not through strength or courage, but by being so gross her body literally melted faces. The show confirmed that maybe the abuse was justified all along. Meg really was that repulsive. Throughout all of this, Meg possessed genuine talents the family ignored. She spoke multiple languages, played instruments, excelled at sports, and consistently showed more emotional intelligence than anyone else in the house. None of it mattered, because the family needed her to be worthless. The Stan Thompson theory suggested Peter might not be her biological father, offering an explanation for his hatred. But even if true, it did not excuse 2 decades of cruelty. Then Seth MacFarlane admitted the real reason. The predominantly male writing room could not write teenage girls and found abusing Meg therapeutic. They knew what they were doing. They knew it was wrong. They did it anyway because it felt good. Only when women joined the writing staff in season 22 did the abuse finally stop. This matters because millions of people watch this show. An entire generation learned that dismissing and mocking teenage girls was acceptable comedy. "Shut up, Meg" became a cultural catchphrase. The damage extended beyond fiction into how real people treated real women and girls. Family Guy did not hate Meg Griffin, but the men who created her hated having to write her. And that hate, disguised as comedy and broadcast for over 20 years, revealed something deeply broken about how our entertainment industry views women, girls, and who deserves dignity in storytelling. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why Family Guy treated Meg Griffin the way they did, make sure to subscribe. I've got another analysis coming soon. Over 2 hours of disturbing Simpsons theories to fall asleep to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.